Chapter 907. Sure enough, Dr. Roman's next words directly threw the matter onto Gohan's head. According to Dr. Roman, the reason why Thousand Do Isuzu fell sick was because some evil aura had invaded his body. Thousand Do Isuzu was originally in a dying state, but under the effect of Ashima's sword, Thousand Do Isuzu's immunity completely collapsed. This evil aura could collide in Thousand Do Isuzu's body uncontrollably. Once Thousand Do Isuzu died, this evil aura might even control Thousand Do Isuzu's body, preventing him from returning to his original world through the dimensional vortex. Instead, he would become a puppet controlled by evil. At that time, everyone might even have to destroy Thousand Do Isuzu's body. Dr. Roman's words made Gu Xuanwu even more nervous. It was fine if his mother didn't have long to live, but she was going to be turned into a puppet after her death. This was something Gu Xuanwu couldn't accept. There was only one way to save Thousand Do Isuzu, and that was to expel the evil aura in Thousand Do Isuzu's body. This way, not only would the sword wounds be fine, but Thousand Do Isuzu would also completely recover and become the immortal Yuan Ko who could live for 100 years. However, Dr. Roman said that this evil aura was very powerful, and it might even be the aura emitted by the universe-class or intergalactic Yuan Ko. With his strength, he definitely wouldn't be able to expel this aura. Only by finding the source of the evil power and defeating it could he completely save Thousand Do Isuzu. Very well, this way the whole thing became a very traditional routine, which was commonly known as the brave fighting the evil dragon routine. Defeating the evil demon king would save the beautiful princess. Then, the brave and the princess would live happily together. This was a very standard routine. However, the tricky thing happened next because Dr. Roman made it very clear that he didn't know where the source of the evil aura was. The other great ancestors also shook their heads in response, expressing that they had never heard of the existence of evil, nor did they know where it was located. This way, the situation fell into a deadlock. The brave fighting the evil dragon at least knew where the evil dragon's nest was. However, Thousand Do Isuzu was going to be game over in one day, and everyone hadn't even found the location of the final boss. Actually, I think the manager of Chidu Isuzu actually knows the source of this evil existence. Dr. Roman suddenly said thoughtfully, I've diagnosed the manager a few times before, and I've also mentioned the evil aura. However, every time I mentioned it, the manager's eyes became strange. He asked me to stop talking, and he never asked me how to deal with the evil energy. So I guess the manager might know the inside story. She might even know what the source of the evil aura is and where it is, but out of some scruples, she would rather die than tell anyone about it. Why? Mother, why did she have to be so silly? If you're sick, you should go and get it treated. If there's an evil existence, then go kill it. Why do you want to die? Gu Xuanwu's words became choked. People always have a lot of scruples. I think the person your mother scruples the most is you. Gohan stroked the head of the Gu Xuanwu and said faintly, living in this world, other than when you are a baby, you will never be able to obtain true freedom. This has been the case since ancient times. These words are profound. Speaking of which, brother, who are you? How come I've never seen you before? Dr. Roman nodded approvingly, then looked at Gohan curiously and asked. My name is Gohan, I'm Gu Xuanwu's father, Gohan said with a face full of smiles. So you're Miss Xuanwu's father. Speaking up to here, Dr. Roman's smile suddenly froze. Wait, if you're Miss Xuanwu's father, then wouldn't you be the manager's? Alright, this isn't the main point. Gohan didn't want Dr. Roman to continue because he didn't want to overly emphasize the non-existent husband and wife relationship between him and Chidu Isuzu. Is there any way to wake Isuzu up? Even if it's just to wake her up for 10 minutes, it would be good for her to talk about the evil existence. Then I'll try my best. Dr. Roman nodded, then took out a box out of thin air. The box contained a row of silver needles. Who would have thought that this foreigner Dr. Roman actually knew Chinese medicine, and could even use acupuncture, a miraculous technique that had been completely lost after the apocalypse. That's right, the miraculous medical technique of acupuncture had been completely lost in the human world. The council once offered 100 million renminbi as a reward in an attempt to find the lost acupuncture technique. Unfortunately, after so many years, there was no discovery. Not even 1 or 2 yuan ko who knew acupuncture. Who would have thought that Gohan would actually meet a foreigner who knew acupuncture in the Guanghui amusement park? Dr. Roman inserted more than 20 needles into Chidu Isuzu's body, but no matter what he did, Chidu Isuzu did not wake up. The doctor could only shake his head helplessly and put away all the needles. There's no other way, the evil energy has invaded too deeply, and the manager doesn't seem to want to wake up. Unless that old man, Hua Tuo, comes personally, there's no way to wake the manager up. Dr. Roman's words made Gohan's heart skip a beat. This Dr. Roman actually knew about Hua Tuo, and humans had been searching for him for more than 800 years. Naturally, it was impossible to find Hua Tuo again. Humans had been searching for him for 800 years, and even if Gohan had great abilities, it was impossible to find Hua Tuo in a day. Therefore, the only way was to see if there was a second person who knew the inside story. Auntie Kwang San. Auntie Kwang San is the vice general manager of the amusement park. She might know something. Gu Xuanwu immediately exclaimed, and then she began to search the entire room for traces of Kwang San. Unfortunately, Kwang San had just jumped out of the window, and naturally, Gu Xuanwu could not find any trace of Kwang San. Manager Kwang San was here just now. How did he disappear in the blink of an eye? A Yuan Ko said in confusion. All right, regardless of whether he was here or not, the most important thing now is to find Manager Kwang San. That's right. Everyone, don't stay here, let's go out and find Manager Kwang San. After many onlookers of Yuan Ko shouted, they immediately scattered to look for Kwang San, who had just jumped out of the window. In the blink of an eye, only Gu Xuanwu, Gohan, and Qian Doisuzu were left in the room. Gu Xuanwu hugged Qian Doisuzu and cried for a while. Then she walked to Gohan's side and directly threw herself into Gohan's arms and cried bitterly. Gohan could only gently comfort his cheap daughter, and secretly thought about all kinds of things that happened in the past few days. Suddenly, he had a ridiculous feeling. He wanted to become Jiendi and destroy all Yuan Ko, but now he was living in harmony with such a large group of Yuan Ko? Time passed by, and the other Yuan Ko who went to look for Kwang San all sent back helpless news. As the vice general manager of the amusement park, Kwang San seemed to have disappeared. They searched the entire amusement park, but there was no trace of Kwang San. Because she had suffered a huge mental blow in a short period of time, Gu Xuanwu's spirit had long been in a shaky state. She didn't know when she fell asleep, so Gohan could only carry her back to her room, cover her with the quilt, and then silently return to his room. But at this time, Gohan's room was already a mess, because Qingpin, the troublemaker, had woken up. He didn't know if it was because he hadn't seen the solid cold yet, but Qingju seemed to have a little hyperactive. She pulled Douyu, the guy who also wanted to see the world in chaos, and tossed them around in the room for a while. The little loli that Gohan picked up last night was so scared that she shrank in the corner and shivered. After all, Qi didn't have the experience of restraining children, so it could only watch helplessly and let them do whatever they wanted. Shi Shui was still shrinking in her scabbard and unwilling to come out, while Yi Tian was still sleeping on the floor, as if she played all night last night. I'm starving, I'm starving. Gohan, you're finally back. Qingpin's stomach is almost flat from hunger. As soon as he saw Gohan come back, Qingpin immediately went to Gohan's side shamelessly, grabbed Gohan's trousers, and said pitifully, I'm starving too. Douyu is starving too. Douyu didn't want to be outdone and imitated Qingpin to act cute. Gohan smiled bitterly. He really had to give it to these two guys. Without a choice, Gohan could only grab the necks of the two troublemakers, Chinpin and Doyu, like he was grabbing two ducks, and put them on the table. Then, he took out 2 bowls of instant braised pork and rice from his dimensional pocket, as well as a large portion of vacuum braised pork and a large portion of vacuum braised carp. After that, he prepared the dishes for the other sword ladies and freed Shui and Juzi. He also gave Etian a kick to wake her up and got all of them to eat at the table. After that, Gohan picked up the little Loli who was hiding in the corner and expressing her fear. "Come and eat something." As the little Loli was still young, Gohan didn't take out the instant braised pork and rice directly. Instead, he chose a bowl of congee with pork and century egg. He scooped a small mouthful with his spoon and fed it to the little Loli. The little Loli seemed to have never seen this kind of novel food before. She was a little scared at first, then tentatively extended her soft little tongue and licked the spoon. Then, a surprised expression appeared on her face. "It smells so good." After the little Loli confirmed the taste of the food, she immediately swallowed the congee with pork and century egg in the spoon without hesitation. She was immersed in a feeling of happiness. "Humph! Bad Gohan." Seeing this scene, Chinpin looked unhappy. Idiot Gohan hasn't fed Chinpin for a few days. Chapter 908. The little Loli ate very quickly. She didn't look like a 4 or 5-year-old Loli at all. She ate at least at the speed of a 7 or 8-year-old. She didn't even chew and just swallowed it directly into her stomach. After a few mouthfuls, Gohan stopped feeding her. Instead, he put the spoon back and solemnly said to the little Loli, "You can't swallow it directly into your stomach when you eat. You have to chew it until it's soft." "What is eating? What is chewing until it's soft?" The little Loli looked at Gohan blankly, and asked as if she didn't understand what Gohan meant at all. What was the meaning of eating and chewing? "Have you never eaten before?" Gohan asked in disbelief. "I don't even know what eating means. Do you think I've eaten before?" The little Loli pouted and stared at the leftover pork and century egg porridge in the bowl. Her saliva flowed down unconsciously and dripped into the bowl. From the Tsihai dictionary, eating is. Gohan originally wanted to use the Tsihai dictionary's explanation to explain the meaning of eating, but when he recalled the contents of the Tsihai dictionary, he realized that the Tsihai dictionary's explanation of eating was like this. It refers to life or survival in general. From a normal person's point of view, this explanation was not wrong. However, when Gohan wanted to explain the word eating to the little Loli, this life or survival in general was obviously not suitable. Eating is like this. Helpless, Gohan could only teach by example. He stuffed a mouthful of rice into the little Loli's mouth, and then held the little Loli's upper and lower jaw with both hands. He helped the little Loli to chew for a while before letting the little Loli swallow it. This is eating. Gohan finally concluded. It's to send things into your stomach after chewing them through your mouth. These things will be converted into energy for your survival and will also be converted into the meat on your body. Only eating can help you grow, make you grow taller, gain weight, and become an adult. Do you understand now? I understand. Although she said that she understood, the little Loli still had a confused look on her face. But I don't understand. If I have to eat like this in order to grow taller and fatter, and become an adult, I don't understand. Dad and Mom never eat, so why did they become adults? What? Your parents don't eat? Gohan almost bit his tongue. What do you do when you're hungry? Meditate. At this time, the little Loli was sitting on Gohan's lap. Relying on her small body, she simply sat cross-legged on Gohan's lap and assumed a meditative posture. After cultivating for a while like a monk, she opened her eyes and said, "This is what my mother taught me. When I'm hungry, I just need to close my eyes and feel the fragrant powder in the air. Then, I breathe the fragrant powder into my brain, and I can solve the problem of hunger. Although the fragrant powder is fragrant, it's still not as delicious as this porridge. I still prefer to eat porridge. Guhan suddenly felt that he might have discovered the greatest secret of Radiant City. The people here actually didn't eat, but relied on some kind of fragrant powder in the air to survive. Guhan casually swept up a sword aura, which swept up a large amount of air. Guhan then took out a filter from a portable water purifier from his dimensional pocket, allowing the air swept up by the sword aura to quickly pass through the filter. In the end, a thin layer of white powder accumulated on the surface of the filter. Guhan carefully scraped the white powder onto his palm and brought it to his nose for a sniff. As expected, there was a faint fragrance, similar to the prickly heat powder commonly used by children. It was a fragrance that no one would reject. Looks like the secret is in this powder. Guhan immediately thought that the reason why humans in Radiant City turned into walking corpses might be related to the constant use of this fragrant powder as a substitute for eating. Moreover, this fragrant powder could directly enter the human brain. Perhaps it was this fragrant powder that paralyzed the nerves in the human brain. Guhan couldn't wait to test the composition of this fragrant powder. But at this moment, a crisp shattering sound came from the window of Guhan's room. Kwang 3, dressed in red, bluntly floated in from Guhan's window. "I'm scared." The little loli immediately shrank into Guhan's embrace. When she saw Kwang 3, she revealed an instinctive expression of fear. It seemed that the battle last night had caused the little loli to be extremely afraid of this blood-red woman. "What are you doing here? Do you still want to fight?" Guhan patted the little loli's body and bluntly asked. "I can't beat you," Kwang 3 admitted very straightforwardly, "but if you want to save your wife, you have to come with me, but you can only bring a sword mistress." After saying that, Kwang 3 didn't give Guhan any chance to ask any questions and jumped out of the window again. The opportunity was fleeting, and Kwang 3 would soon disappear from Guhan's sight. Considering the various secrets of Radiant Amusement Park, as well as his unfulfilled responsibility for the Black Tortoise, Guhan grabbed the Juzi sword and jumped out of the window with Kwang 3. Leaving behind a few words, "Chidian, take care of them. Don't let anyone leave the room." Kwang 3's speed was very fast, the kind that could teleport while running, so Guhan had to go all out to keep up with Kwang 3's speed. Kwang 3 took Guhan all the way through the entertainment area and the sports area, and directly entered a large forest in the depths of Radiant Amusement Park. This forest covered about 70% of the area of Radiant Amusement Park, and it didn't seem to have been developed much. There was only a quaint forest trail, and there were 1 or 2 stone benches on both sides of the trail for tourists to rest on. Other than that, there was a large area of traditional primitive forest. Once they entered the depths of the forest, it seemed particularly dark and gloomy, quite like the man-eating forests in horror stories. When they reached the deepest part of the forest, Kwang 3 finally stopped running. Naturally, Guhan also stopped. "Why did you lead me here?" Guhan looked around at the deep environment around him. "You didn't set up an ambush here, did you? If I say that there are 7 or 8 Yuan Ko who are as powerful as me around here, will you run away?" Kwang 3 asked with a cunning smile. "I will choose to kill you first, and then run away myself," Guhan replied faintly. "What an unromantic man." After saying that, Kwang 3's face suddenly became extremely serious. It was not like her previous coquettish style at all. "Actually, we haven't reached the place yet. I just don't want to disturb his peace. Follow me step by step, and don't make any noise." After saying that, Kwang 3 walked forward again. Guhan didn't know what Kwang San was trying to do, but he didn't hesitate to follow behind her with his own ability. After walking for a few minutes, the forest in front of them suddenly opened up. The trees had all been cut down, leaving only wooden stumps and a towering stone tombstone in the center of the stump. The stone tombstone was very exquisitely made, with all kinds of strange patterns engraved on it. It looked magnificent, and one could easily tell that it was a tombstone of a rich family. The tombstone was also very well taken care of. There were no weeds around it, and even the surface of the tombstone was clean. Obviously, people often came here to sweep the tombstone. Tomb of the Elf King Goku Sherdao. Gohan silently looked at the name on the tombstone. Elf King Goku Sherdao. This was a name that Gohan had never heard before. As for the title of Elf King, it was even more puzzling to Gohan. Although there were many kings among the handsome elves with two pointy ears, those kings often had tongue-twisting Western names. It was the first time Gohan had seen a traditional Japanese name like Gohan Sherdao. Could a Japanese also be the king of the elves? Sherdao. Kwang 3 suddenly knelt in front of the tombstone, hugged the tombstone and began to cry. What surprised Gohan was that while crying, Kwang 3's clothes suddenly turned into a snow-white wedding dress. At this moment, Gohan's mind was in a trance. It was as if he saw Artoria in a wedding dress for the first time in the game's instance dungeon a few months ago. She was just as beautiful and soul-stirring, and there was also a tragic story behind her back. Kwang San had been crying for a long time, and Gohan had been watching her cry from behind. Finally, after a long time, Kwang 3 finally stopped crying, let go of the tombstone, and stood up shakily. Did you know? Kwang 3 said with a hollow expression. In fact, the manager was not the first person to be controlled by evil energy. The first was him, a stupid and lovely high school student, the king of all elves. But in the end, he fell under the evil energy and became an irrational puppet. Finally, I broke his neck, burned his body, and buried it here as a pile of ashes. What a sad story. Gohan tried to make his voice sound sorrowful because he wasn't moved by such a story at all. In fact, the entire human world was full of such stories of separation and reunion. For example, Old Chun and his son, whom he met at the Shanhai Pass battlefield. The relationship between father and son wasn't any weaker than the relationship between Kwang 3 and his lover, but didn't they have no choice but to accept such a sad ending? For hundreds of years, I have been looking for the source of the evil energy. Kwang 3's expression instantly became ferocious. Just a while ago, I finally found it, but my strength is not enough to deal with it. So you want to use my strength to deal with it? Gohan narrowed his eyes. He finally understood why Kwang 3 called him here. Yes, last night I was just testing your strength. I thought it would be amazing if you could have 70% of my strength. I didn't expect you to be able to suppress my ability. In this way, our strength is enough. You want to save your wife, and I want to avenge my king. Our cooperation is mutually beneficial. You have no reason to refuse me, Kwang 3 said confidently. Chapter 909. Why are you looking for me? Gohan asked, puzzled. You are not the most powerful person in the Guanghui amusement park. I walked around this morning, and I saw at least 2 people stronger than you. Why didn't you ask them to come with you? You just walked around and you found those 2 people? Kwang 3 looked a little horrified. Both of them are very low-key people. I'm afraid that even the other people in the amusement park don't know how terrifying their strength is. How did you see through their strength? We, the sword bearers, have been fighting with Yuan Ko for 1,000 years. If we didn't even have a way to see through Yuan Ko's strength, we wouldn't have been able to survive for so long, Gohan said indifferently. Cut the crap. Tell me why you didn't look for them. Obviously, they are more trustworthy. After all, you are the same kind. It is because we are the same kind that I can't look for them, Kwang 3 said in a deep voice. Yuan Ko's strength alone can't kill that evil existence. Only the power of the sword bearers can truly destroy it. If you hadn't come to the Guanghui amusement park, I'm afraid I would have to go out and find a sword bearer to help me in a few days. Kwang 3 gritted her teeth. Obviously, her resentment toward this evil existence had reached its limit. Then you should be glad that I came. Gohan shrugged. Otherwise, I can guarantee that if you dare to approach any human sword-bearer, they will attack you without hesitation. If it were me 3 months ago, I would have attacked you without hesitation. I wouldn't have given you a chance to talk to me. Then, should I cry tears of gratitude? Kwang 3 suddenly showed a flower-like smile. Coupled with the tear stains on her face, she looked extraordinarily strange. Or, you want me to offer this useless body? Crazy 3 pulled up his gothic pleated skirt, and a black forest flashed past. Crazy 3 was actually wearing nothing underneath. You have to tell me everything you know. You can't hide anything. I can't follow you into such a dangerous place without knowing anything, Gohan said gravely. Of course. What do you want to know? I'll answer all of your questions. Kwang 3 smiled and put down his skirt. Who is that evil existence? Why did he release his demonic energy to deal with 1050 bells and your king? Gohan asked. His name is Gilgamesh. I don't know if you've heard of him. Kwang 3 finally said the name of the evil existence. Gilgamesh, so he's here. Gohan had a look of sudden realization. Of course he knew of Yuan Ko, who had left a crucial mark in the history of humanity after the apocalypse. This Yuan Yen had been active during the early stages of the Great Calamity. He had even clashed with the Sword Ancestor, forcing the Sword Ancestor to the brink of death. If the Sword Master had not comprehended the 1,000-sword skill to the level of the 10,000-sword skill at the critical moment and repelled Gilgamesh with a dying blow, the history of mankind might have ended at that moment. Although Gilgamesh was repelled by the Sword Ancestor, he was still one of the few leaders among the Yuan bandits at that time. He also became one of the founders of the largest Yuan dynasty faction, the Palace of Martyrs. He led the first generation of 10 kings of the Palace of Martyrs on the battlefield and finally established the Palace of Martyrs, a Yuan dynasty faction that had existed for more than 1,000 years. It was worth mentioning that King Arthur Artoria was not among the 10 kings of the Palace of Martyrs in the early days. Gilgamesh was active until the time of Zetian-Gyendi. After Zetian-Gyendi ascended, he also appeared in the eyes of humans a few times. However, all news of Gilgamesh disappeared in an instant. After 100 years of concealment, the Palace of Heroes simply removed Gilgamesh's name from the list of 10 kings and replaced it with King Arthur Artoria's name. Gilgamesh was a very active Yuan Ko among the Yuan Ko. Humans had plenty of data on Gilgamesh. This data clearly showed that Gilgamesh was definitely at the peak of the universe rank Yuan Ko. Some scholars even suggested that Gilgamesh had reached the flood rank in some aspects and should be treated as half a flood rank Yuan Ko. After all, he was the powerful Yuan Ko who once beat up Kanzu, who had just become an immortal sword rank sword wielder. He forced Kanzu to stimulate his potential and break through his limits to create the predecessor of the Billion Swords art, the Myriad Swords art. I won't do it. Gohan didn't care about his face at all and directly stated his decision. What a joke. No matter how confident Gohan was in his strength, he wasn't confident enough to think that he could defeat Gilgamesh, who was equivalent to half a flood rank Yuan Ko. Even if Gohan became a spirit sword rank sword wielder, Gohan wouldn't have the guts to do so, not to mention that Gohan was only a famed sword rank sword wielder now. Are you afraid? Are you still a man? Kwang 3 was a little anxious when he heard this and began to use a lame method of provocation. Whether I'm a man or not doesn't depend on what you say. Gohan waved his hand. I won't admit that I'm afraid. As a famed sword rank sword wielder, it's natural for me to be afraid of half a flood rank Yuan Ko. What about your wife? Aren't you going to save your wife? Kwang 3 quickly pulled Chidu Isuzu out. Tell me the truth. I'm a human and she's Yuan Ko. Because of some mistakes, Black Tortoise was born. I don't mind making this mistake go back to square one. Gohan's tone was as cold as a block of ice. There's really no good man. Kwang 3's tone became more and more contemptuous. I've long guessed that you humans are bastards who only know how to protect yourselves. But please use your brain and think about it. If Gilgamesh still had his full strength, it would be enough for him to jump out and destroy our Radiance amusement park. Why would he secretly use such a dirty trick like evil energy? According to my calculations, he will break out of the seal in about half a year's time. If we don't take this opportunity to kill him, he will break out of the seal sooner or later. When that time comes, even you human sword-bearers will have a headache. His hatred for you humans has grown deeper and deeper over the centuries. Once he returns to Shanghai Pass, I'm afraid that your heavenly cycle star formation will shatter in an instant, and the 12 ancestors of sorcery will break out of the seal. Then, the end of the human race will really come. That's right, Gilgamesh has been sealed away for a long time, but as time passes, the seal has become weaker and weaker. In fact, there was no need for Kwang 3 to say more. Gohan had more or less guessed that Gilgamesh was in a state of being sealed. Otherwise, why would he disappear for more than 700 years? If possible, Gohan really did not want to fight with Gilgamesh now. No matter what, he had to give himself another 10 or so years. It would not be too late to make a move after he became an immortal sword-tier sword wielder. But now, according to Kwang 3, Gilgamesh would break out of the seal in only half a year. Moreover, he was in a completely closed environment like Shanghai Pass, where sword essence could not be replenished. In this half a year, Gohan had no other way to increase his strength except by taking the sword essence oral solution to increase his sword essence. Therefore, half a year did not mean much to Gohan. It was better to take advantage of the fact that the seal was a little stronger and kill Gilgamesh on the spot. Just as Kwang 3 had said, Gohan could not accept Gilgamesh breaking the seal. The reason was very simple, because once Gilgamesh broke the seal, no one in the entire Shanghai Pass would be able to resist his sword-bearer. The heavenly cycle star formation might not even last for an hour. Just thinking about it was like the end of the world. Where is he sealed now? When Gohan asked this question, Gohan already knew what he should do. It's right under this forest. Kwang 3 stomped on the ground. In fact, I suspect that the entire Radiance amusement park exists to suppress Gilgamesh. Otherwise, Gilgamesh would not be suppressed under this forest. You don't know the origin of this amusement park? Weren't you in this amusement park from the beginning? Gohan asked curiously. No. In the entire amusement park, only your wife and the maid sisters are the real founders. The rest of the people, including me, came to this amusement park later. At that time, we naively thought that this amusement park was a paradise for us, the Yuan Ko who did not want to fight anymore. I didn't expect it to be a huge pit with such a terrifying existence sealed underground. When Kwang 3 said this, there was a hateful expression on her face. It seemed that she hated the Radiance amusement park as well. This gave Gohan a very uneasy feeling. He was afraid that Kwang 3 had other plans. She might even want to trap the entire Radiance amusement park. What's going on with these humans? Why are they here? Why do they look like walking corpses? Secretly raising his guard against Kwang 3, Gohan asked another question that he was very concerned about. When I came here, there were less than 1,000 of them. At that time, they were not like this. They had completely lost their intelligence. At that time, they were still normal people. Kwang 3 recalled. But as time went by, these humans multiplied more and more. Although the number of people increased, the land gradually became insufficient to grow enough crops for these humans to survive. Some humans somehow discovered and absorbed the powder in the air to resist hunger, but the more powder they inhaled, the dumber they became. Later, there was a disaster in the amusement park. The entire land of the amusement park became no longer suitable for growing crop. These humans had no choice but to rely on the powder in the air to survive. As a result, all of them became what they are now. I will say one more thing. Your wife seems to have known that this would happen. Therefore, all the attractions in Radiance Amusement Park can alleviate the side effects of the powder. Otherwise, if they stay in the state of walking corpses for a long time, all of these humans will eventually turn into real zombies, and they will all die. Chapter 9-10. Crazy Three's words unraveled many of the doubts in Gohan's mind. At the very least, he had completely figured out why these humans had turned into walking corpses. Just as Gohan had guessed during the meal, it was caused by the mysterious powder in the air. The origins of most of the Yuan-Ko in the amusement park were also clear. Before the establishment of the free cities, many Yuan-Ko were tired of the endless war with humans. After hearing about the existence of Yuan-Ko's paradise, they took the initiative to come to the northeast. However, because Radiance Amusement Park did not desperately promote itself like the free cities, it rarely took the initiative to reveal its location. Therefore, not many Yuan-Ko knew about it. In the past few centuries, only a few hundred Yuan-Ko had arrived here. Later on, when the free cities were established, those Yuan-Ko who pursued freedom joined the camp of the free cities. The former free city, Radiance Amusement Park, was completely forgotten by most of the Yuan-Ko. Humans never knew of the existence of such an amusement park. As for the origins of the first 1,000 or so humans in the amusement park, it was unclear. Perhaps nearby survivors had discovered this place and taken the initiative to enter the dimensional rift to survive and reproduce. Why they appeared here was not important. What was important was that there were now 300,000 people here. They were all human compatriots, and Gohan had the obligation to ensure their lives and remove the restrictions on the powder. In fact, the way to return to normal was very simple. They just needed to ensure that they had enough food. As long as there was enough food for them, there was no need for them to absorb the powder in the air. After the amusement park's continuous purification, they would soon become normal humans again. However, it was easier said than done to find food to feed 300,000 people. Unless Gohan could get help from Shanghai Pass, he would not be able to have a continuous supply of food. But in this way, Radiance Amusement Park was bound to be exposed to humans. Radiance Amusement Park was not like the free cities, which had the suppression of the desolate level Yuan-Ko. Gohan did not doubt the nature of humans. They would not choose to live in harmony with this Yuan-Ko force. Instead, they would choose to directly destroy this Yuan-Ko force without anyone knowing. But in this way, Gu Xianwu, who grew up here, was bound to have a deep-seated hatred for humans. What would happen to Gohan's father's position? Of course, the trickiest problem was Gilgamesh. Gohan really did not want to make a move against such an unknown and powerful existence. Therefore, Gohan was still hesitating. If Gilgamesh's seal could still exist for half a year, it would actually be an excellent buffer time for Gohan. At least, Gohan could have a full 60,000 sword elements in his body, and the total number of sword elements would reach 100,000 quarks. In terms of quantity, it would reach the lowest strength of a spirit sword wielder. In this way, the odds of winning the battle would undoubtedly improve a lot. In fact, Kwang 3 did not force Gohan to kill Gilgamesh now. As long as it was before Gilgamesh broke the seal, it would be fine. However, 1050 bells could only live for one day. If Gohan did not make a move with Kwang 3 tonight, Gu Xianwu would lose her adoptive mother forever. Finally, when Kwang 3 saw that Gohan could not give her an accurate answer, she gave Gohan a small headset, which could only be used in Radiance Amusement Park. Through this headset, Gohan could talk to Kwang 3 at any time and tell her his decision. This made Gohan fall into a deep hesitation. Even after returning to his room, Gohan was still hesitating. Gohan really hoped that he could go back to his past self 3 months ago, so that he would not worry about this ridiculous problem at all. He would directly return to Shanghai Pass to recuperate for half a year and fight Gilgamesh in his strongest state. But now Gohan was bound by Gu Xianwu and could not make the answer he wanted. "Dad? Do you want to see Mom?" I think if you are willing to stay by Mom's side, Mom may be able to. The haggard Gu Xianwu broke into Gohan's room. Although she did not finish her words, Gohan already understood what she meant. Gu Xianwu hoped that Gohan could accompany Thousand Do 50 Bells, hoping to use the power of love to wake up Thousand Do 50 Bells. It had to be said that this was a very nonsensical thing. Not to mention whether there was love between Gohan and Thousand Do 50 Bells. When Thousand Do 50 Bells fell into a deep coma, even if there was a strong love, it would not be able to reach Thousand Do 50 Bells' heart. The so-called recovery of the vegetative state was just a trick to deceive children. But looking at Gu Xianwu's extremely expectant eyes, Gohan hesitated for a while and finally got up and entered Thousand Do 50 Bells' room with Gu Xianwu silently sitting beside her to accompany her. But at the same time, Gohan made another decision in his heart. Miss Kwang 3. I think it's better to do it after half a year. Gohan took advantage of Gu Xianwu's absence and said to Kwang 3. You really made such a decision? Heartless man. Kwang 3 disdainfully ridiculed Gohan and took the initiative to hang up the communication with Gohan. Gu Xianwu did not know that he had actually harmed his mother. If Gu Xianwu did not let Gohan accompany Thousand Do 50 Bells, then Gohan would still be entangled in his own hesitation. Maybe he would have made the decision to go fight Gilgamesh tonight. But Gu Xianwu forcibly dragged Gohan to accompany Thousand Do 50 Bells, so Gohan formed a self-thought deal in his heart. I will accompany you here for one night, and I can redeem my sin of saving your life. Of course, this was a very nonsensical self-righteous deal to comfort himself. But in fact, this became the last straw that broke the balance in Gohan's heart. Time passed minute by minute, and finally, until dawn the next day, a miracle did not happen. Thousand Do 50 Bells not only did not wake up, but her vital signs were getting weaker and weaker. Gu Xianwu went crazy and called Dr. Roman over. After the final examination, Dr. Roman could only helplessly shake his head. The grief-stricken Gu Xianwu hugged Thousand Do 50 Bells' body and cried endlessly. In the midst of Gu Xianwu's pain, Thousand Do 50 Bells breathed her last breath and completely lost all signs of life, becoming a stiff corpse. Just as Dr. Roman had predicted after Chiaki Isuzu died, her corpse turned into a puppet that was being controlled, revealing a devilish expression. Grabbing the arm of Gu Xianwu that was leaning against her, she was ready to bite down. Not good. Don't let her bite people. Learning is spread in this way. Whoever is bitten by her will be the next person to be invaded by evil energy, Dr. Roman hurriedly said. But by the time he said this, it was already too late. The teeth of the puppet Thousand Do 50 Bells were less than a mouth away from Gu Xianwu's arm. The heartbroken Gu Xianwu's body was already extremely weak, and simply did not have the strength to resist the strength of the puppet Thousand Do 50 Bells. Gu Xianwu was about to be bitten. Poochie! At the last moment, Thousand Do 50 Bells' head was like a radish that was plucked off, making a poochie sound as it rolled onto the bed. The wound on her head did not even have a drop of blood, but instead emitted a thick black smoke. It seemed like Thousand Do 50 Bells' blood had long been assimilated by the evil energy. The one who made the move was none other than Gohan, who had sharp eyes and quick hands. In fact, he had long been on guard against Chien Do Isuzu's changes. When Gohan saw Chien Do Isuzu's strange face, his hand had already moved, and without hesitation, he cut off her head. Mom! Mom! Gohan naturally had good intentions in order to save his daughter, but to Gu Xianwu, there was nothing more painful than seeing his mother's head being chopped off by someone else. Furthermore, the one who chopped off his mother's head was his own father. Unable to accept all of this, Gu Xianwu cried out twice and fainted with his eyes closed. Gohan carried Gu Xianwu into his embrace. At the same time, under Dr. Roman's command, the others tied Thousand Do 50 Bells, who had lost her head but was still struggling to get up and attack others, onto the bed. What do you think we should do now? The rest of the Yuan Ko asked Dr. Roman in a panic. They did not want to become a puppet like 50 bells. Burning her is the best method. Only by burning her body to ashes can her soul be completely freed, and we can also have the final safety. Dr. Roman gave the answer to the question. Burn. Then burn her. The rest of the Yuan Kos quickly formed a united front. Although they were all indebted to 50 bells, and were usually very respectful to her, 50 bells was already a dead person. However, Chidu Isuzu was already a dead person. Rather than letting her corpse struggle here, it was too dangerous. It was better to cremate her. Anyway, she would have to be cremated sooner or later. Wait! Just as the others were preparing to carry 50 bells' bed to be cremated, Gohan spoke up to stop them. Let this body struggle a little longer. I believe Black Tortoise must really want to see her mother for the last time. But this is too dangerous. One of the Yuan Kos said. I will stay here to watch over her. If she struggles out of the bed, I promise I will chop her into minced meat. Do you think that's all right? Since Gohan had already said so, and with his identity as 50 bells' husband, the other Yuan Kos naturally couldn't say anything else. Hence, they all ran out of the room, secretly deciding to hide far away from this room until 50 bells was cremated. I hope you don't hate me. Gohan touched Gu Xianwu's cheek and said. Chapter 9:11. Things always go contrary to one's wishes. After Gu Xuanwu woke up, he was scared like a rabbit and escaped from Gohan's embrace. Then he threw himself to the side of the struggling puppet mother, trying to find the last trace of warmth from Isuzu's body. Helpless, Gohan could only forcefully pull Gu Xuanwu away, using his own strength to restrict Gu Xuanwu and Isuzu's body to maintain a certain distance, looking at her from afar. Why? Why are you so heartless? Gu Xuanwu, who was on the verge of collapse, roared. She is your woman. She is my mother, and you just chopped off her head like that? Are you still human? When I chopped off her head, she was already dead, and if I didn't chop off her head, you would have followed your mother's old path and become like her. Gohan tried his best to explain. In fact, he was not very good at this kind of explanation. What's the big deal? This way I can be with my mother forever. Why did you stop my mother from taking me away? Gu Xuanwu cried crazily. If you and your mother leave, then what about me? Don't you want your father anymore? This sounded very familiar. It was a common line from a 9 o'clock primetime family ethics drama. But at this time, Gohan realized that this was the only thing a father could say. What father? What do I want a father for? Gu Xuanwu suddenly laughed. It was the kind of laughter that carried a heart-wrenching pain. I have never had a father since I was young. I am already used to not having a father. To me, a father is a superfluous existence, an unnecessary existence. Do you understand what I am saying? Did you think that because I took the initiative to escape to find you, I really miss you? Gu Xuanwu became crazier and more painful as he spoke. That's where you're gravely mistaken. You're deluding yourself. I have never missed you. I have never needed you. I am only looking for you for my mother, even if it is just to make her smile. I can just go to the side of the street and pull anyone to be my father. I do not need you. I only want my mother. Faced with this situation, even though Gohan had thousands of explanations in his heart, he couldn't say a single word in the end. In fact, Gohan had a chance to save 9,050 bells. As long as Gohan and Kwang 3 worked together to kill Gilgamesh last night, then 9,050 bells would be able to survive. It was Gohan who decided to sit back and watch Chien Do Isuzu die for a higher chance of success, or rather, for his own life. Therefore, if Gohan were to explain himself at this time, Gohan would definitely not be able to say anything. He could only forcefully hold the Gu Xuanwu in his arms and let her curse him crazily. As long as she did not try to approach the 1050 bells, it was enough. Time passed in this stalemate. After an unknown amount of time, Gohan suddenly heard an extremely urgent voice. Quick! Come here quickly! It's almost too late. This was Kwang San's voice. Listening to her panting voice, it was as if something extremely terrifying had happened to her. What's wrong? What happened? Gohan asked unhurriedly. Idiot! You're an idiot! I'm also an idiot! Kwang San's voice became more and more urgent. Gilgamesh is about to break through the seal. If you don't show up soon, it will all be over in less than 5 hours. What did you say? Gohan hurriedly stood up. Didn't you tell me that he still has half a year? Originally, there was still half a year, but after this morning, we only have 5 hours left. As for the reason, don't you always boast about your intelligence? Even if I don't say it, you can guess it. Even though Kwang San was panting, she did not forget to add a sneer. After being awakened by Kwang San, Gohan also immediately guessed something that Gohan had never thought about. That was why Gilgamesh constantly used his evil energy to corrupt Yuan Ko. After becoming a puppet, Yuan Ko had almost completely lost his strength when he was alive, and was almost the same as the simplest skeleton monster. This trick had no other use except for assassination. The speed of corruption was not fast, it was completed over a long period of time, so it was impossible to quickly form a zombie tide. So why did Gilgamesh spare no effort to use his own blood to corrupt others? No matter what the specific reason was, there was only one fundamental reason, that was, doing so could accelerate Gilgamesh's power, and help him to break free from the wind and rain as soon as possible. This was the only reason why Gilgamesh was willing to work so hard to accomplish such a tiring task. When he cut off Chien Doisuzu's head in the morning, Gohan had already noticed that the black gas that came out of the neck did not attack others, but directly flew out of the window and floated in the direction of the forest. At first, Gohan did not think anything of it. It seemed natural for the gas to leave through the window. Now that he thought about it, the black gas was probably what Gilgamesh really needed. The black gas must have finally returned to Gilgamesh's body. This black gas that had absorbed all the power of Chien Doisuzu's body must have greatly increased Gilgamesh's power and accelerated the process of him breaking the seal. This was why Gohan clearly had half a year, but in the blink of an eye, there were only 4 hours left. I'm such a fool. For the first time, Gohan felt that he was extremely stupid. He actually did not see through such a simple trick of Gilgamesh. In this way, in order to prevent the Zhou-Tian star battle formation from being destroyed by Gilgamesh, Gohan must kill him before Gilgamesh broke the seal. In other words, Gohan must kill him immediately. What was the difference between this and last night's action? If Gohan and Kwang 3 had joined forces last night, Chien Doisuzu might not have died, and Gu Xianwu would not hate him so much. Everything was caused by his own smart and self-righteous decisiveness. If Gohan had followed his conscience a little, then things would have been completely different. At this point, it was meaningless to say anything more. Gohan must immediately go and fight with Kwang 3, and then join forces to kill Gilgamesh. Gohan had no other choice. Kwang 3, I ask you, where is Ashima locked up? Gohan suddenly asked Kwang 3. Things are urgent to this extent, and you still have the mood to care about your other woman's affairs? Kwang 3 thought that Gohan wanted to let Ashima escape before the battle, so he angrily accused him. Are you going to tell me or not? If not, I will leave here right now and no longer care about the life and death of Guang Amusement Park. Gohan said decisively. Although Kwang 3 was unhappy, he could only tell Gohan where Ashima was imprisoned. Gohan first knocked out Gu Xianwu, who had already lost his mind, and then walked to the constantly struggling corpse of Chien Doisuzu. He directly put her corpse into his dimensional pocket, completely eliminating the danger of his own corpse. Then, Gohan immediately returned to his room and put all the sword maidens into his sword. He told the little loli not to leave the room. He went all the way down to the basement of the Red Maple Kingdom's castle, and found Ashima in the dungeon. What happened? Is that bitch trying to kill me? Ashima saw Gohan and said while gritting her teeth. If it wasn't for the fact that Ashima's teeth were constantly trembling, Gohan would really think that this woman was a woman who was not afraid of anything. If the bitch you are talking about is the one you stabbed, then congratulations, she is already dead, Gohan said coldly. Really? Then even if I die, I can still smile in the underworld. Ashima's mouth was still firm, but her gums were trembling even more violently. I don't have time to watch your fearless tricks. I will let you out right now. Gohan took out his sword, and neatly cut off the iron chains that bound Ashima's hands, and released her. Thank you for saving my life. I promise I will repay you well in the future. Ashima bowed to Gohan, and was ready to escape from here. I did not save you for nothing. Gohan grabbed onto Ashima and quickly told her, Gilgamesh is being suppressed in this place, and he's about to break the seal soon. I can only buy him a little time. Once he breaks the seal, the entire Zhou-Tian star battle formation will be finished. After you escape from here, immediately break through the barrier of the Zhou-Tian star battle formation, and use your personal terminal to contact Liuyan Ling. Tell her the location of the entrance, and ask her to do her best to get here and enter Guang Guang Amusement Park. I am afraid I can't deal with Gilgamesh on my own, and only with the help of Liuyan Ling will I have the final chance of winning. Before that, I will do my best to delay him. Wait a minute. Can you slow down a bit? I am stupid. I can't react fast enough. Ashima felt like she was about to faint. Then listen, you only have one task. After you get out, immediately contact Liuyan Ling through your personal terminal and ask her to come here. As for the reason, tell her that if she doesn't come, Gohan will die, and there is no reason for him to live. Alright. I understand now. Ashima nodded. But are you sure Liuyan Ling will come here just because of this? She will. Gohan nodded. Because if it was Liuyan Ling who told me this, I would also go to her at all cost. Disgusting. Ashima spat, and immediately rushed out of the dungeon. After all, the entire Guang amusement park was in chaos, and no one cared about her escape. I have already prepared a backup plan. Let's see how powerful Gilgamesh, the former Hero King, is. Gohan let out a long sigh, and walked into the depths of the forest without hesitation. Chapter 9:12. Why are you so slow? Seeing that Gohan finally appeared in front of him, Kwang 3 frowned and asked impatiently. I went to get reinforcements. Gohan looked in the direction of the amusement park's entrance. I think this is probably our only chance of winning. Don't be so pessimistic. Gilgamesh is not as powerful as you think. Kwang 3 seemed to be comforting Gohan and himself at the same time. Okay. Where is the entrance to the underground seal? You don't want us to dig a hole all the way down, do you? Gohan looked around and found no place that could be called an entrance. It's too late to dig a hole now. Kwang 3 pressed on the branch of a giant tree next to him. The trunk of the giant tree automatically opened an opening, revealing a deep passage inside. Looking at this passage, Gohan felt that it was particularly familiar. Isn't this the home of Zhetianjiendi that I went to in the game dungeon? Even the method of opening the door was exactly the same. The entrance was all designed in the hollow trunk. Who knows who copied who? Following the hollow of the tree trunk all the way down, Gohan finally landed in a hall. It's too dark. It would be great if there were some lights, Gohan said. The next moment, the whole world became bright. Countless fluorescent tubes illuminated the entire underground world, as if it was daytime. This was a hall. This hall was very similar to the entrance to the Ibis temple, the lair of the 3 Egyptian gods that Gohan had been to before. It was an empty hall with a tightly shut door connected to it. Wait, I think I've seen this scene before. Seeing this scene, Gohan could not help but be stunned. Not only was the entrance to the hall exactly the same as the entrance to Zhetianjiandi's home, but even the scenery in the hall was exactly the same. Even the closed door was exactly the same. There was also a simple keyhole, and the door could be opened by inserting the key. If it weren't for the fact that they were separated by two different spaces, the boundary between the game and reality, Gohan would have thought that he had entered a dungeon again. The only difference was that this door was probably different from the door seen in the dungeon. The surface of this door was filled with all kinds of extremely complicated magic symbols and runes. Golden rays of light could be seen constantly trying to rush out from the inside of the gate. Every time the golden rays lit up, the runes on the gate would also emit an astonishing light, suppressing the golden rays from the inside of the gate. However, Gohan noticed that every time these runes pushed back the golden light, the runes themselves would be damaged to a certain extent. The golden light grew brighter and brighter, while the runes grew dimmer and dimmer. Do you see that sword? Kwang 3 pointed to a pattern on the wall next to the door and said. But the heavens had pity on him. Gohan couldn't see that this pattern was a sword, because only a small part of the sword's tip was left. If Kwang 3 hadn't pointed it out, Gohan would never have guessed that it was a sword. When I first came here, there was only a small part of the sword's picture left. Kwang 3 said leisurely. Later, as time went by, the picture of the sword also kept disappearing. So, I guess that this might be a sign of how much damage Gilgamesh has done to the seal. Once this sword completely disappears, Gilgamesh will be able to break through the seal of the gate and break free from it. Originally, according to my calculations, the remaining length of the sword should be able to last for half a year, but this morning, there is only a little left. So, I estimate that in 4 hours, Gilgamesh will be able to break free from the seal of the gate. So, how should we enter the gate and fight Gilgamesh now? Do you want us to open the gate? Wouldn't that also release Gilgamesh? Gohan said. Of course, we can't open the gate, but we can enter from the small door next to it. Kwang 3 led Gohan to the side of the wall, but strangely, there was no trace of the small door that Kwang 3 mentioned on this wall. Look at the text annotations here. Kwang 3 pointed to a row of text on the wall and said, "This is China's ancient seal script. I spent a lot of effort to understand the meaning of these ancient seal script. This tells us that if Gilgamesh is about to break the seal, then we can form a team under the leadership of human sword-wielding warriors to fight Gilgamesh. As the hero king, Gilgamesh's greatest ability is to transform the famous weapons stored in his body into his avatars to fight. At the same time, each avatar represents one of Gilgamesh's lives. If these avatars are not killed, Gilgamesh will not truly die. The reason why we chose to seal Gilgamesh instead of killing him was not because we wanted to create trouble for future generations, but because the sealer was unable to completely kill Gilgamesh. They could only use the seal's power to constantly obliterate the avatars in Gilgamesh's body. When the seal is about to be broken, it will also be when Gilgamesh is at his weakest. The avatars in his body should be reduced to nothing, and that is the best time to kill Gilgamesh. Humans can also completely eliminate this scourge. After reading the explanation of the ancient seal script, Gohan finally understood the reason behind it. He nearly believed that his predecessors were idiots, like the legendary Bravehearts in Bravehearts and Dragons. They only sealed the dragon instead of killing it, thus causing trouble for future generations. So it was because of Gilgamesh's avatars. Then how do we enter this door? Gohan could not understand the ancient seal script, so he could only ask Kwang 3. It says that under the guidance of the Sword Maiden, we will naturally be able to open the entrance to the tiny door. Kwang 3 answered. Is that so? Upon hearing this, Gohan took out his Chidian sword and stabbed the tip of the sword into the wall. As the Sword Maiden touched the wall, a golden illusory light slowly extended from the tip of the sword, and finally turned into a round golden door of light. As long as one stepped into this door of light, he should be able to enter the sealed world of Gilgamesh. Let's go in. Kwang Three's voice was slightly trembling. It was unknown whether it was because he was still looking forward to this moment, or because he was afraid of this moment. Wait, I need to leave a signal. Gohan was not in a hurry to enter and close the door. Instead, he picked up the Qi sword and carved a sentence on the wall, touched the wall with the tip of the sword. This was a way to tell Liu Ling how to enter the door, and then he led Kwang Three into the door of light. Welcome, welcome. This is the first companion I've seen after 700 years. When Gohan and Kwang Three appeared in the door, they saw a somewhat unexpected scene. In Gohan and Kwang Three's imagination, Gilgamesh should be tied to a stone pillar or a wall with heavy chains and runes, enjoying the treatment that a prisoner should enjoy. But in fact, Gilgamesh was very elegantly sitting on a chair, and there was a table in front of the chair with steaming hot tea on the table. And this room had all kinds of facilities, such as a bed, a TV, toiletries, and so on. No matter how one looked at it, it did not look like a sealed place, but more like a well-treated prison. The only thing missing in this cell was clothes, because Gilgamesh only had a pair of boxers on, revealing his perfect mermaid line, as well as his bright 16-pack abs. Coupled with Gilgamesh's handsome face that seemed to have been carved out by a knife, and his shiny golden hair that could blind a person's eyes. Just from this point of view, Gilgamesh was indeed the template of a perfect man. Unfortunately, Gohan did not pay attention to Gilgamesh's eyebrows. His attention was attracted by the scene inside the prison. Not only was the scene outside exactly the same as Zhetianjiandi's house in the instance dungeon, the layout inside the door was also exactly the same as the layout inside the instance dungeon. This was a knockoff of Zhetianjiandi's house. Could it be that this place was built by Zhetianjiandi? However, for some unknown reason, it became Gilgamesh's prison. My two dear friends, before we officially start the battle, would you like to have a drink first? Gilgamesh raised the teacup in his hand and gestured to Gohan. Although you are going to die soon, I will miss our friendship. Who wants to drink your broken coffee? Kwang Three's face was filled with madness and anger. Is that evil energy coming from you? Are you the one who killed our king? I've killed a lot of people. There were Yuan Ko and humans. How would I know who the king is? Gilgamesh was not angry. Instead, he showed a king's smile. By the way, looking at your attire, you should be an elf. Come to think of it, I seem to have used my essence to control a male elf. The amount of essence in his body was unexpectedly large, and it helped me save 50 years of time. The king you were talking about should be him. Gilgamesh, I must kill you. Kwang Three desperately took out his pistol and aimed it at Gilgamesh's head. Why are you so angry? Isn't it better to die in peace? Gilgamesh lightly pointed his finger, and a short dagger broke through the void beside his head, directly colliding with the bullet shot by Kwang Three. Kwang Three's bullet was cut in half in an instant. At the same time, the dagger flew in the direction of the bullet. Kwang Three instinctively wanted to dodge Gilgamesh's dagger by teleporting. But in the next moment, Kwang Three's pupils instantly shrank to the size of a needle. She was horrified to find that her teleportation couldn't be used in this space. This was fatal for Kwang Three. Without teleportation, Kwang Three's dodging ability was even worse than that of the dragon-level Yuan Ko. Gilgamesh's dagger directly pierced into Kwang Three's head. Kwang Three's head exploded like a broken watermelon. Kwang Three didn't even have time to teleport, and her head was directly blown up by Gilgamesh. Chapter 9:13 Fishbowl Sword. Gohan clearly saw the appearance of the dagger that Gilgamesh shot out and shouted the name of the dagger. This dagger was actually the predecessor of Gohan's Dayu sword, the Fishbowl Sword. Gilgamesh actually had the Fishbowl Sword in his hand. Not bad, not bad. You can actually recognize the name of this sword. but this sword should be quite famous in your human world. When I first saw it, I felt that it looked very good, so I added it to my king's treasure house. Don't you think it's great? Gilgamesh said proudly, as if he was showing off the wealth in his treasure house to Guhan. I understand. Guhan suddenly remembered that in the human records, Gilgamesh had a magical power. He could copy all the weapons that he had seen with the naked eye into his king's treasure house. If the level of the weapon was lower than Gilgamesh's own level, then Gilgamesh could copy the power of the weapon with 100% certainty. If the level of the weapon was higher than Gilgamesh's level, then Gilgamesh could only copy 1/20th of the weapon's power. Now you're the only one left. If you kneel in front of me and surrender to me, and offer your humble self-esteem, then this king will be merciful and let you live a little longer. When this king breaks this damned seal, then I will turn you into powder. Gilgamesh said very benevolently. Who said that I'm the only one left? Guhan looked at the ground beside him, and as a result, a shadow appeared out of thin air on the ground. There seemed to be something constantly shaking, and finally, a brand new Kwang 3 emerged from the shadow. Why didn't you save me just now? The first thing that Kwang 3 did after his rebirth was not to kill Gilgamesh, but to direct his anger at Guhan. With your swordsmanship, you should have been able to send that sword flying, right? Kwang 3 was right. Just now, Guhan did have the ability to send the fishbowl sword flying, saving Kwang 3's life. That's not your real body, why should I waste my strength? Furthermore, you have the ability to teleport, so the fishbowl sword shouldn't be able to hurt you. Guhan frowned. Instead, why didn't you teleport just now? That will only work if I can teleport, Kwang 3 said angrily. Gilgamesh seems to have completely sealed off the power of space. My teleportation ability can no longer be used here. No. Hearing Kwang 3's words, Gilgamesh quickly denied. I don't have the ability to seal space. The space here was sealed by the two girls who sealed me. If you want to blame someone, blame the two of them. It has nothing to do with me. You said it was two little girls who sealed you. Who are those two little girls? Guhan's eyes lit up. If he could find out who sealed Gilgamesh, he might be able to unravel the secret of Radiance Amusement Park. Strange? Don't you know who sealed me? Gilgamesh, on the other hand, showed a strange expression. I thought you were ordered by those two little girls to kill me, but now it seems that's not the case. I don't know one of the two little girls who sealed me, but I know the other one even if she's burned to ashes. Gilgamesh's muscles bulged. Artoria, my dear and good disciple, she sealed me with her own hands and took away the supreme throne that belonged to me. She is indeed the disciple that I, Gilgamesh, have taught. Artoria is your grand disciple? Merlin is your disciple? Hearing Gilgamesh's words, Guhan was shocked. Guhan had also seen Artoria's master, great wizard Merlin. If Artoria was Gilgamesh's grand disciple, didn't that mean that Merlin was Gilgamesh's disciple? You know Merlin's name. It seems that after I was sealed here, my good disciple Merlin also came to this world. That's really interesting. Gilgamesh clenched his fist. By the way, is my good disciple Merlin dead? If he's not dead, it seems that there will be another name on my must-kill list when I get out. You won't have the chance to kill anymore. Guhan took a deep breath. Today, I will end you here. Little friend, you're very brave. But courage needs to be matched with strength. Let me see how strong you are. Gilgamesh flicked his finger, and the fishbowl sword floating beside him suddenly flew toward Guhan. The speed of this sword was about 3 times faster than the speed of the attack on Crazy 3. In the eyes of ordinary people, perhaps in the blink of an eye, the fishbowl sword was only a few centimeters away from Guhan's head. Clang! Guhan swung the Qigyan sword in his hand, and the fishbowl sword was bounced away. Gilgamesh's eyes lit up when he saw this nimble movement. Interesting. Gilgamesh couldn't help but applaud as if he had seen an interesting play. Your reaction is really good. It has the shadow of fleeting year calendar. No, even fleeting year calendar at the famed sword level can't wield a sword like yours. Although he is only the most useless rookie at the famed sword level, your swordsmanship can surpass him. This is very praiseworthy. I have already raised my expectations for you by 1%. Let me see your performance again. As Gilgamesh applauded, 3 more voids appeared beside him, and 3 swords were projected out. They merged with the fishbowl sword and stared at Gahan like a tiger watching its prey. Isien's sword. Tianwen's sword. Etienne's sword. Gahan's pupils shrank into a straight line. He couldn't help but recite the names of the 3 swords that had appeared. Gahan had seen all 3 swords before. They were Liunian Ling and his sword lady. Go. My little cuties, let me see how powerful this outstanding little friend is. As soon as Gilgamesh's voice fell, the 4 swords turned into 4 sword lights and attacked Gahan in turn. In an instant, the 4 swords surrounded Gahan and launched a thrilling siege. Because there were no restrictions on the user, the angles of the 4 swords were extremely tricky. They would often attack Gahan from angles that couldn't normally appear. Although Gahan was able to send them flying one by one in the end, this kind of battle made Gahan feel very uncomfortable after a long time. Sooner or later, his defense would fail. There's no other way. I can only use this move. Gahan gritted his teeth, and the power of the stars in his body poured into the Qidian sword in his hand in a strange way. The surface of the Qidian sword instantly emitted a strange blue color. 9 swords of mysterious heaven, swordsman kill. The shining blue Qidian sword instantly hit the Tianwen sword's body. Previously, this kind of hit would at most send the Tianwen sword flying. However, it was different this time. When the 2 swords came into contact, the strange blue light suddenly invaded the Tianwen sword's body. The Tianwen sword let out a shrill sword cry and suddenly broke into pieces. It became a broken sword that fell to the ground and finally turned into specks of starlight that disappeared into the air. This was the magical power of the 9 swords of mysterious heaven. Sword Soldier Kill. The Sword Soldier Kill, as the name suggested, was a killing power that specifically targeted weapons. If this attack hit the body, it wouldn't have a very strong effect, and it might even be worse than a normal attack. However, if this attack hit the weapon, the result would be different. Depending on the difference in the level of the weapon, it could directly cause the weapon to shatter. The Qidian sword was a famous sword lady, and her potential was an emperor sword lady. In terms of level, it was equivalent to suppressing the Tianwen sword by at least 3 levels. The Tianwen sword couldn't withstand this level of sword soldier kill at all, so it simply broke into pieces on the ground and turned into specks of starlight that disappeared. My baby! Seeing the Tianwen sword disappear, Gilgamesh actually spat out a mouthful of blood. He didn't think that breaking a sword could make Gilgamesh spit out blood. Could it be that the weapon that killed Gilgamesh in the king's treasure house could also cause actual damage to Gilgamesh? Gahan thought to himself. It was a pity that a killing move like the sword soldier kill could not be used continuously. This move required the adjustment of one's aura. Before Cruel Han finished adjusting his aura, the sword soldier kill could not be used again. However, Gilgamesh didn't know this. It seemed that he was worried about the Qidian sword in Gahan's hand. Gilgamesh waved his hand, and the 3 swords that surrounded Gahan all flew back to his side. I have the world's king's treasure house. Show your true face. Gilgamesh began to recite an ancient incantation. This incantation had a strong power, and the entire air began to tremble along with Gilgamesh's incantation. It could be imagined that once this incantation was completed, it would become an extremely strong power. Unfortunately, Gilgamesh couldn't recite this incantation in its entirety. This was because a shining golden blade had already appeared in front of Gilgamesh's chest. If Gilgamesh still insisted on reciting his incantation, he would probably pay the price of having his intestines pierced through. Damn brat! Gilgamesh had no choice but to stop his incantation. The three swords from before instantly appeared in front of his chest to block the blade of the Chidyen sword. Then, he leaped away from Gohan's attack and angrily said, "Damn brat, why did you interrupt my incantation? Can't you let me finish reciting the incantation smoothly?" Only those idiots in the movies would let their opponents finish reciting their incantation. Gohan's sword knocked away the three swords in front of him, and he teleported again in front of Gilgamesh. However, this time, his target changed from Gilgamesh's stomach to Gilgamesh's neck. "Impatient brat, where did the traditional virtue of your Chinese people go?" There was a flash of light in Gilgamesh's hand, and a round object that didn't look like a sword, but more like a closed umbrella blocked the cold blade of the sword. "Isn't respecting the old and loving the young a traditional virtue of your Chinese people? I'm an old man who has lived for 6,500 years. Shouldn't you be a little more humble?" Gilgamesh raised the long sword in his hand that looked like a closed umbrella. This was Gilgamesh's true weapon, the sword of defiance that could split the heavens and earth. Chapter 9:14. The sword of defiance in Gilgamesh's hand was a powerful divine sword, and it was also the famous divine weapon that had dominated the world for 200 years. However, what was interesting was that 100 years after Gilgamesh's disappearance, the sword of defiance that had been passed down on Earth since ancient times was unearthed in the ruins of ancient Berlin. It became an immortal sword that fought for humanity. "Go to hell," Gohan muttered as his figure appeared beside Gilgamesh once again. From the looks of it, Gohan was planning on using a storm-like attack to crush Gilgamesh. In fact, this was a very correct decision. This was because almost all the historical records had such a record. That was, the mighty hero King Gilgamesh was a person who wasn't good at melee combat. What he loved to do the most was to stand far in the sky and use his infinite number of divine weapons to tear his enemies to pieces. There were very few records of melee combat. Gilgamesh seemed to be deliberately avoiding melee combat with his opponents. The only record of melee combat was recorded in a battle with Khonsu. Back then, Khonsu, who had mastered the myriad sword art, had caught Gilgamesh off guard. He had even sliced off his entire right arm, forcing Gilgamesh to create a few avatars to successfully escape. In the end, he no longer dared to provoke Khonsu again. Therefore, Gohan had always been attempting to pull Gilgamesh into the rhythm of melee combat. In fact, this was a very easy task. This was because the battlefield wasn't a vast and boundless world. Instead, it was a narrow space the size of 1 or 2 basketball courts. This was a battlefield that was almost tailor-made for melee combat. Gohan believed that it was the greatest chance of victory. But soon, Gohan realized that it wasn't easy to pull Gilgamesh into melee combat in such a narrow space. After using a few high-speed movements to open up a distance between him and Gohan, the unlucky Gilgamesh returned the replicas of Heavenly Sword, Yuchang's sword, and Restful Immortal Sword to his side. He revealed a kingly smile and said to Gohan, "How about I find a few beautiful ladies to be your opponents?" "What beautiful ladies? What opponent?" Just as Gohan was feeling puzzled, Gilgamesh tapped the hilt of the Sword of Defiance against the sword hilt of the Sword of Defiance. The three swords simultaneously released a dazzling light and began to rapidly transform in the air. It looked exactly like the process of the Sword Maiden's liberation. In reality, when the light faded, 3 girls that Gohan was very familiar with appeared in front of Gohan. Yi Tian, Yi Xian, and Yu Chang, the 3 valiant and formidable-looking sword ladies, stood with their swords in their hands, looking awe-inspiring as they looked at Ling exactly the same. Gohan carefully sized up the 3 sword ladies' replicas, and realized that no matter if it was in terms of clothing or appearance, they were all impeccably similar. Perhaps Yi Xian and Yu Chang's sword didn't have the right to speak, but Yi Tian and Gohan were persuasive enough. After all, Gohan and Yi Tian had been together for more than 3 months, and the skin and flesh that was exposed outside of their clothes was deeply engraved in Gohan's memory. He would definitely not be mistaken. Although Gohan wanted to take a few more glances, the three replicas clearly didn't intend to give Gohan any more chances. As soon as they were liberated, they immediately surrounded Gohan with their swords in hand, and began to fight with Gohan. After 7 or 8 exchanges, Gohan had a rough idea of the Sword Maiden replicas' strength. First of all, these Sword Ladies replicas didn't just replicate the Sword Maiden's appearance, but also their sword technique. For example, the few sword strikes he had exchanged with Heavenly Sword's clone were completely in line with Heavenly Sword's battle style and sword technique. Heavenly Sword was adept at using continuous and unceasing sword moves to bring his opponent into his own rhythm, and then completely destroy his opponent. However, replicas were still replicas. Just like the man-made Sword Ladies, they didn't have their own emotions. The artificial Sword Maiden's eyes were empty, showing her idiotic personality. Meanwhile, the Sword Lady's replica's eyes were filled with crimson flames, and apart from killing, there were no other emotions in their minds. They were just weapons through and through. Boring. After figuring out the Sword Lady's replica's methods, Gohan felt extremely bored. All creations that lacked a soul had a special characteristic, and that was that no matter how powerful their abilities were, they would always operate in a rigid and inflexible manner. In the eyes of others, this might be a sign of power and not making mistakes. However, in Gohan's eyes, this sweater was filled with flaws. It looked very thick, and it also felt very warm when worn. However, with just a slight tug, he would be able to discover countless flaws. At the same time, Gohan felt a deep sense of anger. When he saw the Sword Ladies he was familiar with being turned into replicas by the enemy, waves of anger uncontrollably blossomed from the bottom of his heart. Shatter! In an instant, the Sword of Origin in Gohan's hand seemed to tear through space. No one could clearly see what had happened, but the 3 Sword Ladies' replicas were sent flying at the same time, smashing heavily into the surrounding walls. After the 3 Sword Ladies' replicas landed on the ground, they did not stand up again. This was because their upper bodies had lost most of their flesh and blood, revealing their empty abdomens. With just one slash, Gohan had killed all the Sword Ladies' replicas. Although the Sword Maidens didn't have blood, they still had internal organs. However, through the openings on the abdomen of these replicas, they could clearly see that the stomachs of these replicas were empty, except for pink, slowly moving muscles. It was like a ceramic Buddha statue placed in a house. From the outside, it looked like a benevolent Buddha, but if you looked through the base, you could see that it was empty inside. Clap, clap, clap. Gilgamesh applauded enthusiastically. Very powerful swordsmanship, very exciting. You're next. Gohan stared at Gilgamesh and said, No, no, no. Gilgamesh shook his head. The wealth in my treasury is like the Milky Way in the sky. I'll give you 3 more of these useless replicas. After saying that, Gilgamesh kicked the broken Sword Ladies' replicas in disdain, and they all turned into starlight and disappeared. At the same time, the void around Gilgamesh broke open again, and the previously disappeared Etien's sword, Ishien's sword, and Yuchang's sword once again flew out of the void, turning into perfect Sword Ladies' replicas. How is it? My treasury isn't bad, right? Gilgamesh looked at the 3 Sword Ladies' replicas standing in front of him, but they've already been defeated by you, so I'll find some helpers for them. After Gilgamesh finished speaking, 4 more swords flew out from his king's treasure house. Finally, they transformed into Sword Maidens and joined the besieging Gohan. Seeing this scene, Gohan couldn't help but lick his lip. Gohan could still recognize these Sword Ladies. They were Mingyue's Sunset Sword, Yu Wang's Gojian Sword, Miaobi's Light Concealing Sword, and Yao Guang's Big Dipper Sword. Unlike the previous 4 Sword Ladies, these 4 swords were all famed Sword Ladies, so the difficulty of fighting them was clearly several times higher. But in reality, this wasn't all, because in the next moment, 4 more sword ladies flew out of Gilgamesh's king's treasury. Gohan had never seen these 4 sword ladies in person, but Gohan was sure that they were all spirit sword ladies. But it wasn't over yet. In the end, Gilgamesh even released the Sword of Obedience in his hand, turning it into an immortal sword lady and joining in the battle. Now Gohan had to face the combined attacks of 12 sword ladies. Among them, there was 1 immortal sword lady, 4 spirit sword ladies, 4 famed sword ladies, 2 treasure sword ladies, and 1 ancient sword lady. In fact, these famed, artifact, and ancient sword maidens couldn't be treated according to their own levels. With Gilgamesh's strength, the Yen sword, which was the lowest level among these sword maidens, had combat strength equivalent to that of a famed sword maiden. Damn it, between me and Gilgamesh, who's the real sword bearer? Gohan complained as he looked at the 12 sword ladies in front of him. In the underground of the Radiance amusement park, where Gilgamesh was sealed, the thrilling battle between Gohan and Gilgamesh was still going on. But unlike Gohan's earlier display of power, Gohan was now in an extremely dangerous situation. In this 12 versus 1 battle, Gohan was already destined to lose from the very beginning. The battle prowess of the 4 spirit sword maidens was already at the limit of what Gohan could barely defeat, but the problem was that in addition to these 4 spirit sword maidens, there was also the existence of the immortal sword, unruly sword. What was even more terrifying was that this Sword of Obedience was not a replica from the king's treasury, but a real sword that belonged to Gilgamesh. Therefore, this Sword of Obedience did not rely on its combat instincts to fight. Instead, it was being controlled by Gilgamesh's will, which was quietly floating in the air. In other words, Gilgamesh had actually joined the battle, but he was borrowing the body of his Sword of Obedience. This was the combat power of a real immortal sword lady. In less than 2 minutes, Gohan had already fallen into a state of certain death. And this was because the Sword of Obedience controlled by Gilgamesh was slacking off. It did not directly join the encirclement against Gohan, but stayed outside the encirclement to hold the line. From time to time, it would stab at Gohan from a certain angle, forcing him to retreat to defend himself. As a result, an opening appeared in a certain direction, allowing him to take the attacks of the other sword ladies. This caused Gohan to be extremely puzzled. Why didn't Gilgamesh directly join the attack? If that was the case, Gohan's losses would be far greater than what he was currently suffering. Chapter 9:15. What exactly is this Gilgamesh afraid of? Of course, Gohan did not think that Gilgamesh was simply toying with him. Gohan could feel that Gilgamesh was actually estimating something, which was why he did not dare to join the siege against Gohan and could only secretly help from the side. Moreover, he was also very careful about his power, not daring to use too much of it. 9 swords of mysterious heaven, Sword of the Abyss, Golden Chrysanthemum. No matter what Gilgamesh was afraid of, if Gohan did not find a way to break the current stalemate, then Gohan would really die under the siege of these replicas. So, Gohan mustered up the star power equivalent to 15,000 quarks in his body and used the evolved version of Sword of the Abyss, Golden Chrysanthemum. The Golden Chrysanthemum-like sword chi harvested the replicas' bodies in this narrow space. Big capital really did pay big dividends. Under the attack of Sword of the Abyss, among the 11 sword maidens that besieged Gohan, except for the 4 spirit sword maidens, the bodies of the other sword maidens directly collapsed and disappeared into specks of starlight. 9 swords of mysterious heaven, Sword of the Vault of Heaven. Although the bodies of the 4 spirit sword maidens did not directly collapse, they were still seriously injured. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Gohan directly used the strongest single-target killer move of the 9 swords of mysterious heaven, Sword of the Vault of Heaven. With one move each, the 4 spirit sword maidens were sent back into the starlight. In the blink of an eye, the whole situation seemed to have been completely reversed. All the replicas in front of Gohan had disappeared, leaving only the sword maidens that Gilgamesh himself controlled. If Guhan could directly defeat the sword maidens, then it would be no different from directly defeating Gilgamesh. I didn't expect you to hide such a powerful killer move. But this is just a useless last-ditch struggle. Don't you understand how terrifying the king's treasure vault is? The sword maidens who had not spoken until now finally spoke. Although her voice was a standard crisp and sweet female voice, the tone of her voice was completely Gilgamesh's. However, the tone of the voice was completely Gilgamesh's. Gilgamesh was clearly borrowing the mouth of the unfilial sword to speak. The door to the king's treasure vault opened once more and the sword maidens that Guhan had destroyed charged out from the king's treasure vault. It was just like how the Etienne sword, the Isian sword and the fishbowl sword had done in the beginning. In the blink of an eye Guhan had cleared out all of the sword lady replicas. However, the replicas instantly returned and Gilgamesh said cockily, "It's useless. Everything you've done is a deathbed struggle. You must have consumed a lot of sword essence to use that big move just now. Let me guess, how much power do you have left? 70%? 60%? Don't tell me it's less than 50%. But look, your opponents have returned. You've used up so much power, but it's just a waste. Even if you kill them 10 times or even 100 times, they will come out from my king's treasure vault again. Everything you've done is meaningless." If an ordinary person saw this scene and heard Gilgamesh's words, they would probably be so angry that they would directly vomit blood. However, Guhan actually laughed. He laughed very happily and very sincerely. "What are you laughing at? What's so funny?" Looking at Guhan's smile, Gilgamesh started to feel unhappy. "I'm laughing at you. Don't tell me that you haven't noticed? You've lost one treasure from the king's treasure vault," Guhan said with a smile. Gilgamesh's complexion changed. This time, he had only summoned 10 sword maidens from the king's treasure vault, which was one less than before. "Actually, I've already noticed that you seem to be full of misgivings towards me." Guhan squinted his eyes and said, "But why would you have misgivings towards me? I thought of the Tianwen sword's replica that had completely disappeared. It seems that after I used sword soldier annihilation to destroy her, she never returned to the battlefield again. So, I suspected that I might have been very lucky to completely kill her. So, I mixed a sword soldier annihilation into my attack just now to deal with the Isian sword." Guhan laughed even more happily. "Now, it seems that my suspicions were not wrong. The Isian sword's replica did not appear again. Sword soldier annihilation is able to completely destroy the treasures in your king's treasure vault. Are you afraid that I will use this move to deal with your obedient sword? That's not a replica, it's the real deal. Once it's destroyed, it's really over. Come on. Now, I only need to use sword soldier annihilation. I want to see how many treasures in your king's treasure vault can be destroyed by my sword soldier annihilation." Guhan's threat had a huge effect. For a moment, Gilgamesh did not dare to move, afraid that the treasures in his king's treasure vault would once again be destroyed by Guhan. In fact, Guhan was completely bluffing. First of all, sword soldier annihilation had a very long cooldown. Otherwise, Guhan would have used sword soldier annihilation to deal with the replicas of the sword maidens. Moreover, sword soldier annihilation had different effects on different sword maidens. It was very effective against ancient and artifact sword replicas, but once it started to deal with famed sword replicas and above, it was somewhat powerless, not to mention the real celestial sword soldier annihilation. Guhan was trying to stall for time, waiting for his sword soldier annihilation's cooldown to be over. As long as he could completely kill another sword maiden replica, Guhan's battle would undoubtedly be much easier. Therefore, Gilgamesh did not dare to take the initiative to send his replicas to attack. Guhan was also afraid that attacking would expose the fact that his sword soldier annihilation had a cooldown. Both sides just stared at each other. On the other side, a large black bird flew across the sky of the Radiance amusement park. In less than a minute, the large bird flew from the core of the Radiance amusement park to the edge of the Norland Plains, which was also the entrance that Guhan and Gu Xuanwu used to enter the Radiance amusement park. The large bird landed on the ground and slowly retracted its wings into its body. Its pair of bird claws gradually transformed into a pair of delicate and adorable feet. The large bird also instantly turned into a human. This human was Ashima. It turned out that Ashima's Yuan Ko form was actually a monster. Ashima had relied on his monster form to reach the exit of the Radiance amusement park so quickly. Ashima skillfully drew a few runes in the empty air, and the golden door of light from before opened again. Ashima stepped through the door of light and returned to the world of Shanghai Pass. Keeping Gohan's instructions in mind, Ashima did not dare to waste even a second. She quickly rushed out of the cave and arrived at the edge of the barrier of the Zhou Tian Star Battle Formation. Just as she was about to pass through the barrier, she was repelled by the barrier. The flashing electric current charred Ashima's body, and she almost died from the power of the Zhou Tian Star Battle Formation. Tui! I actually forgot to turn back into my human form. A puff of black smoke came out of Ashima's mouth, and then she closed her eyes with a wry smile. The dimensional energy surrounding Ashima's body instantly disappeared, and her charred body quickly turned snow white. Finally, she turned back into the fair-skinned, big-breasted Ashima. Phew! Ashima took a deep breath, and stretched out a finger to test the barrier of the Zhou Tian Star Battle Formation. As expected, no electric current attacked Ashima this time. Ashima finally exhaled the breath in her stomach, and stepped through the barrier. The moment she left the Zhou Tian Star Battle Formation, she regained control of the sword element that was suppressed by the power of the stars because there was no flag planting ceremony. The quantum signal that was suppressed by the power of the stars also regained its connection, which meant that Ashima could contact the major base cities through her personal terminal. Hello! Ashima dialed the communication device of Jerusalem Base City. Your Highness! It's really you, Your Highness! An excited voice came from the other end of the communication device. Recently, the people of Jerusalem had not been having a good time. Because they were worried about the safety of their Highness, or rather, worried about the safety of the precious Anra sword Maiden in her Highness's hands, all the people of Jerusalem lived in fear. If the leader had not insisted that Ashima's soul was still shining, perhaps Jerusalem would have fallen into internal strife. I'll contact the leader right now. Before the staff member on the other end of the communication could finish speaking, he was forcefully interrupted by Ashima. Now is not the time to contact the leader. Connect me to the communication device of the Sun Star Garrison in Shanghai Pass immediately. Hurry up, I have something very important to talk to them about. Although Ashima was now much closer to the Sun Star Garrison than to the Sun Star Garrison in Jerusalem, because of the suppression of quantum communication, Ashima had no choice but to contact Liuyan Ling through the special communication channel in Jerusalem and Shanghai Pass. Otherwise, it would be impossible to contact Liuyan Ling with the personal terminal in his hand. Yes. Although the staff member did not understand what was going on, he still quickly connected the communication device of the Sun Star Garrison. Then, the communication was quickly transferred from the Sun Star Garrison to Liuyan Ling's personal terminal. Ashima, it's great that you're okay. Liuyan Ling's voice sounded much softer than the previous Jerusalemites, but the emotion in this sentence was directed at Ashima, unlike the Jerusalemites, who was only directed at the Anra sword Maiden in Ashima's hand. I'm fine, but I'm afraid your little lover is in trouble. At this time, Ashima did not forget to joke with Liuyan Ling. What do you mean? On the other end of the communication device, Liuyan Ling instantly became anxious. He seems to be fighting Gilgamesh. I think if you don't come to help him, he's definitely dead. Where are you? After asking for Ashima's location, Liuyan Ling directly hung up the communication, unwilling to even say a word to Ashima. Chapter 9:16. On the other side, at Gilgamesh's seal, the stalemate was still ongoing. Just as Gohan thought this stalemate would last a little longer, when Gilgamesh himself realized something was wrong, a new change came to the battle. This change did not come from Gohan or Gilgamesh himself, but from the sealed space. A fluorescent lamp installed at the top of the sealed space suddenly began to flicker. What's going on? Is the light starter broken? Seeing the fluorescent lamp flicker, Gohan instinctively began to suspect that the light starter was broken. But very soon Gohan reacted. This was the place where Gilgamesh had been sealed for hundreds of years, so how could the fluorescent lamp here be an ordinary one, or rather, why did the person who had sealed Gilgamesh back then install a fluorescent lamp here? There was no need for this at all. Unlike the confused Gohan, when Gilgamesh saw the fluorescent lamp start to flicker, he seemed to become excited. It was an excitement that contained both hatred and happiness, as if this was something Gilgamesh had been looking forward to for a long time. Not good. Could there be a problem here? Gohan instinctively felt that something was wrong, and at the same time, the flickering fluorescent tube let out a loud explosion, and the entire tube exploded into pieces. It was also at this moment that the fluorescent lamp's light starter shot out a machine-like beam of light, targeting Gilgamesh, who was standing in the distance. Go! Gilgamesh's main body opened his eyes, and all the Sword Maiden replicas surrounding Gilgamesh charged in the direction of the laser beam, attempting to use their bodies to block the laser beam. The first to face the beam was Etion replica, but she very quickly turned into nothingness under the beam's illumination. Next was Fish Guts, followed by 4 famed Sword Maiden replicas, and 4 Spirit Sword Maiden replicas, but when all 10 Sword Maiden replicas were turned into nothingness, the beam's energy seemed to have been depleted to the point where only a little remained. Looking at the last remaining bit of the beam, Gilgamesh decisively stretched out his left hand. Under the attack of the laser, Gilgamesh's left hand below the arm turned into a puff of black smoke. However, the energy of the laser was limited to that and could no longer cause any more damage to Gilgamesh. It's over. It's finally over. Gilgamesh did not show any sadness when he saw his arm disappear. Instead, he revealed a crazy smile and shouted that it was finally over. At the same time, Gohan noticed that the golden light and various runes covering the walls of the sealed area were rapidly fading away, leaving only a mottled ancient wall and an equally ancient gate. Could it be that the power of the entire sealed land had disappeared? Didn't this mean that Gilgamesh's power had completely lost its suppression? At this moment, the other Gilgamesh's aura began to swell rapidly. Gilgamesh originally gave off the feeling of a ferocious lion, but now this feeling had evolved into that of a berserk Tyrannosaurus Rex, and its aura had increased more than tenfold. However, this also proved that the power of the seal had completely disappeared. Gilgamesh had finally recovered his full power. Are you curious as to why this happened? At this moment, Gilgamesh was in a rather good mood. Hence, according to the traditional villain setting, he began explaining the entire sequence of events. P.S. Author, although I also feel that it is a very stupid thing to let Gilgamesh explain the sequence of events at this moment, the problem is that if you don't explain it now, there won't be a better time to explain it. Anyway, be it domestically or overseas, everyone has agreed to do so. Author, please do so. Let us welcome Gilgamesh to explain the sequence of events. Sorry, I just made a small lie. Although my king's treasure vault does indeed have the most treasures in the world, that is already in the past. The 12 sword ladies from before were actually the last wealth in my king's treasure vault. As a king who was once rich in the world, I am deeply ashamed of this. Gilgamesh's face revealed a truly ashamed expression. As the hero king, he only had 12 treasures left in his king's treasure vault. This was indeed something to be ashamed of. By the way, back then, Kanzu had stolen a lot of information from me. He should have told you that every treasure in my king's treasure vault is equivalent to an avatar of mine. and as long as my avatars don't die, there is no way to truly kill me. Gilgamesh actually exposed his own shortcomings and told Gohan how to kill himself. Of course, just as Gilgamesh had said, this was already known by humans, so it was not considered revealing any important information. However, with Gilgamesh saying this, and connecting it to the information he had seen on the wall before entering, Gohan also understood what had just happened. Previously, the information on the wall had told Gohan that the sealed land possessed the power to constantly kill Gilgamesh's avatars. The moment when the seal was about to break was also the best time to kill Gilgamesh. From the looks of it, that was indeed the case. The fluorescent lamp was likely the core of the seal, but because it was designed to look like a fluorescent lamp, it made Gohan overlook this point in the beginning. Only now did he realize it. The laser beam shot out by the fluorescent lamp had the power to kill Gilgamesh's avatars. Over the centuries, the treasures in Gilgamesh's king's treasure vault should have been mostly depleted by the fluorescent lamp, leaving only the 12 sword ladies. It looks like you have understood it. Then, let me explain it to you more clearly. Speaking of which, why am I in such a good mood today to explain the ins and outs of the matter? Gilgamesh stroked his non-existent beard, as if he was very confused as to why he had to explain the ins and outs of the matter. The source of this seal comes from two forces, one in the south and one in the north, suppressing two spiritual swords, and that fluorescent lamp's light starter. It's these two darn things that kept this king suppressed here for hundreds of years. Following Gilgamesh's words, Gohan looked towards the north and south. Sure enough, he found two spiritual swords, one black and one white, suppressing two spiritual swords at the north and south, like the yin and yang fish of Taiji. It's actually the yin-yang Taiji sword. Seeing these two swords, Gohan's eyes widened. A puzzle that had puzzled mankind for hundreds of years had actually been solved at this moment. At the beginning of the apocalypse, mankind had discovered two spiritual swords, yin-yang Taiji sword. Just like their names, they were actually the same as Ganjiang Mo Xie, male and female Mandarin duck swords, and Yuantu Avicii twin sword. At the same time, they were also a pair of famous twin sword immortals in history who possessed spiritual sword. When these twin sword immortals were still at the spiritual sword level, they were invincible all over the world with their yin-yang Taiji sword. They even defeated most of the sword bearers at the immortal sword level at one time. Of course, this was because the twin brothers had joined forces. Otherwise, in a one-on-one fight, they really weren't that powerful. Their biggest advantage was the yin-yang Taiji sword in their hands. According to the inherited information, when the yin-yang Taiji sword was used together, it could form a yin-yang Taiji fish. All the attacking power would be swallowed by this yin-yang Taiji fish, and then turned into the sword bearer's own power. Just by listening to it, one could tell how powerful the yin-yang Taiji sword was. It was a pity that these twin brothers died in the hands of a flood-level Yuan Ko. Otherwise, there might be a pair of twin Jiandi in human history. Then, maybe the second most powerful Jiandi in history would be Jiandi Zhaotian. When the twin brothers died, the yin-yang Taiji sword had completely disappeared, and no one knew where these two swords had gone. Later generations had excavated the battlefield where the twin brothers died countless times. Later, two Jiandi worked together to capture the flood-level Yuan Ko who killed the twin brothers. They used the most vicious punishment, but they still couldn't find the shadow of this pair of swords. Later, mankind could only helplessly give up the search, but no matter how many years had passed, the second and third places on the spirit sword record were always occupied by the yin-yang Taiji sword. Except for the time when it gave way to the first place, it had never retreated even one place. Unexpectedly, Gohan saw traces of the yin-yang Taiji sword here. It turned out that these two swords were taken by Artoria to seal Gilgamesh. It was no wonder that after so many years, mankind couldn't find any trace of these two swords. According to Gilgamesh, in addition to this pair of yin-yang taiji swords, the most crucial part of the whole seal was the fluorescent lamp's light starter. Guhan then turned his attention to the light starter and suddenly felt that this light starter was very familiar. Oh my god, isn't this exactly the same as the white dwarf key that Guhan once had? It was just that this key was used to forge a new body for the Qi sword more than 10 days ago. Speaking of which, this key should be in the body of the Qi sword now, so why was there an identical key here? Could it be that when this key was forged back then, it was forged in two? This pair of yin-yang taiji swords is indeed very powerful. It can constantly absorb the power of my doppelgangers from my body and then transfer this power to the white dwarf fragment. On the other side, Gilgamesh was still explaining the ins and outs of the matter. Speaking of which, this white dwarf key is a treasure in this king's treasure vault. It was once one of this king's most powerful doppelgangers. Unfortunately, it was made into my greatest nemesis by Artoria's disciple's disciple. Once this white dwarf key fragment absorbs enough power through the yin-yang taiji sword, it will turn this power back to attack me and destroy my other doppelgangers. It's really despicable. However, all of this king's doppelgangers are dead now. The Tai Chi yin-yang sword can no longer absorb this king's own power to seal this king. Therefore, the entire seal has completely disappeared. The white dwarf fragment can also return to this king's hands. Gilgamesh finally finished explaining the ins and outs of the matter, and his whole body revealed a happy smile. Chapter 9:17. I'm finally done explaining. Gilgamesh had explained so much to Guhan, but Guhan had only analyzed two of the most important things. The first was that Gilgamesh had now lost the suppression of the seal, and he had the power of a peak universe level Yuan Ko, which was equivalent to half a flood level Yuan Ko. The second was that Gilgamesh only had one life left. If Gilgamesh could be killed now, then Gilgamesh would never be resurrected, and it would be time for this sinful hero king to end his sinful life. However, it was extremely difficult to accomplish such a thing. It was completely impossible for the current Guhan. If it wasn't for the threat of the heavenly cycle star formation, it would have been impossible for him to do so. Guhan's first reaction was to escape immediately. After all, Gilgamesh couldn't pose too much of a threat to the base city. What truly made Guhan apprehensive was the heavenly cycle star array. Once Gilgamesh broke through the dimensional rift and entered the mountain sea pass, the entire heavenly cycle star array would lose its balance due to Gilgamesh's participation. All the human sword-bearers in the mountain sea pass might very well die as a result. Right after that, the 12 ancestral magi would break out of the array. Just the thought of it made him feel sour. Alright. Now let me send you on your way. Gilgamesh still maintained his king's smile. With a gentle slash of the sword of obedience in his hand, it opened a void door, and then his entire body entered the void. Seeing this scene, other than a bitter smile, Guhan could not show any other expression. This was the way Yuan Ko, who was above universe level, crushed sword-bearers below immortal sword tier. No matter how powerful the sword-bearer was, before becoming an immortal sword tier sword-bearer, they couldn't feel the power of the void. At this time, Yuan Ko, who was above universe level, only needed to open a void door and enter the void. Then, he could attack his opponent from any place and position. It sounded similar to invisibility, but it was much more advanced than invisibility. Invisibility was just hiding one's body. In reality, one was still in this space. Every action would inevitably cause various movements, and a powerful sword master could determine the movements of the invisibility person based on these movements. Therefore, invisibility was not difficult for Guhan to deal with. On the contrary, as long as Guhan could see the opponent's position, then with the unique weakness of invisibility, it would be much easier for Guhan to fight. However, entering the void was completely different. After entering the void, one had to have the power of the void, and be able to sense the fluctuations of the void. Otherwise, it would be equivalent to Gohan completely losing his five senses, and he would no longer be able to find a trace of the enemy. For example, at this time, a small void door suddenly opened behind Gohan, and the tip of the sword of obedience pierced out from this void door at an extremely fast speed. Even though Gohan sensed the presence of the sword of obedience the moment it left the void, it was too late. Gohan had no time to dodge at all, and the sword of obedience stabbed into his back. Gohan's entire body was sent flying, and at the same time, the shield around him trembled violently. 200. At the moment he was sent flying, Gohan could clearly feel that the upper limit of the sword essence in his body had been reduced by 200 quarks. Fortunately, Gohan was holding the Chidian sword. Otherwise, according to Gohan's previous estimation, a quark of sword essence could resist about 3,000 points of damage, and Gilgamesh's sword had directly caused 600,000 points of damage. If Gohan was holding the Juzi sword, then the damage would be enough to pierce through Gohan's shield 3 times, which also meant that the opponent could kill Gohan with one strike. A normal attack from an ordinary Infinity Yuan Ko would only cause 100,000 points of damage, but a casual strike from Gilgamesh had caused 600,000 points of damage. From this, it could be seen that the human records of Gilgamesh were not wrong. He was indeed the top of the Infinity Yuan Ko, and his strength was several times that of an ordinary Infinity Yuan Ko. On the other side, Gilgamesh was also amazed. He did not expect Gohan to be able to take his sword head-on, but his shield still did not break. In his life, he had only seen one famed sword-level swordsman who could do this. I find that you are becoming more and more like that human. Gilgamesh walked out of the void and looked at Gohan with a somewhat solemn expression. I remember when I had just arrived in this world, I met that guy for the first time in a place that you humans call Wuhan City. He actually organized a decent difficulty. I couldn't help but feel an itch to attack that difficulty. I thought that all the humans inside were dead, so I didn't care and just left. I didn't expect that there would be a famed sword-level swordsman who survived. If I had given him one more sword strike, perhaps you humans would have already gone extinct. The man that Gilgamesh was talking about was naturally Kinzu. Gohan was very clear about this part of the story, and it was also the greatest pain in Kinzu's life. At that time, he had been working hard to help the human survivors escape from their predicament, and had paid a great price for it, but everything he had done had been destroyed by a sword strike from a passing Yuan Ko. Later, in countless interviews, Kinzu felt endless pain at this moment, and swore that one day, he would definitely kill that Yuan Ko with his own sword. When people asked Kinzu who this damned Yuan Ko was, Kinzu told everyone that only after he personally killed this Yuan Ko would he have the right to announce this Yuan Ko's name. Later on, Kinzu never succeeded in killing this Yuan Ko, and humans never knew who this passing Yuan Ko was. Now, it seemed that the truth had been revealed. This Yuan Ko was Gilgamesh. It was no wonder that Kinzu and Gilgamesh had always been at loggerheads, and both sides constantly fought until Gilgamesh became afraid of Kinzu, and began to deliberately avoid Kinzu. Only then did this endless battle temporarily come to an end. Looks like I have to learn my lesson this time, and directly crush you here and now. I don't want another person like that man to appear in this world. Gilgamesh finally revealed a serious expression on his face, no longer wearing his usual disdainful smile of a king. Once again, he opened a void gate and entered the void. In the next moment, the obedient sword once again appeared from the void without any warning, and once again sent Gohan flying before he could react in time. While Gohan was still flying through the air, the tip of the obedient sword appeared in Gohan's path of flight, and once again whipped at Gohan's body, sending Gohan flying in another direction. Gilgamesh was like a badminton player who could appear in any position on a badminton court at any time, using the obedient sword in his hand as a badminton racket, while Gohan became a pitiful badminton that Gilgamesh wantonly toyed with. As the one being beaten, Gohan could not resist at all, and could only grit his teeth and silently endure the blows with his sword essence. Perhaps Gilgamesh was finally tired, but after more than 50 consecutive strikes, he finally allowed Gohan to fall to the ground. The impact created a huge crack in the ground. The dizzy Gohan discovered that after the series of attacks, the upper limit of the sword essence in his body had been reduced by more than 10,000 points. Gohan originally had more than 45,000 quarks of sword essence in his body, but now he had lost more than 10,000 points of sword essence. After being beaten like a badminton for a while, he was left with less than 35,000 points, a direct loss of about a quarter of his strength. At this moment, Gohan could not help but recall the conjecture he had after discovering the defensive characteristics of the Chidian sword. At that time, Gohan imagined that he could use the Chidian sword to fight against U-level Yuan Ko. This had already been realized. Gohan was indeed fighting against Yuan Ko, who was equivalent to half a flood level. Gohan also imagined that he might be beaten back to his original form by the Chidian sword and become an ordinary person without sword essence. This seemed to be happening. If the attacks just now were to be repeated 3 more times, Gohan would be completely beaten back to an ordinary person. I can't go on like this. I have to think of a way to hold on a little longer. Gohan used the Chidian sword to barely support his dizzy body. In less than a minute, Gohan had lost his upper limit of 10,000 quarks of sword essence. Gohan had to think of a way to solve this predicament, or else Gohan could only hold on for 3 more minutes. Gohan did not think that Liu Ling would be able to rush over in 3 minutes. According to Gohan's calculations, even if he pushed his speed to the limit, Liu Ling would still need at least 30 minutes to rush over. Gohan had to think of a way to hold on for another 30 minutes. You really surprise me more and more. The series of attacks just now made Gilgamesh start to pant slightly. Such frequent attacks through the void was a very strenuous thing for the universe-class Yuan Ko. Gilgamesh thought that he would be able to kill Gohan with 4 or 5 strikes at most, but he did not expect that after 50 strikes, Gohan would still stand up as if nothing had happened. There was not a single wound on his body, and all his attacks were forcefully taken in by the opponent's personal shield. Even if Kinzu was reborn, Gilgamesh was confident that he could cut the famed sword-class fleeting year calendar into minced meat within 10 strikes. If it was not for the fact that Gohan's aura could not lie, Gilgamesh would have thought that he had met a pretentious immortal-class swordsman, and not a famed sword-class swordsman that Gilgamesh could easily crush. However, this also made Gilgamesh even more determined to kill. Gilgamesh had been chased by Kinzu, and he did not want to fall into the hands of a human again after his rebirth. Forget it. I'm not going to play with you in the void anymore. Gilgamesh flicked his finger slightly and walked out of the void. Come on. The king will be merciful and let you see the king's armor. The sword of defiance in Gilgamesh's hand suddenly dispersed like a machine, turning into a dozen or so different parts. These parts then began to assemble with Gilgamesh's body as the center. Finally, they completely wrapped around Gilgamesh's body, turning it into a sparkling golden armor. This was the reason why Gilgamesh was called the Shining Golden Armor. It was because of this dazzling, holy armor of disobedience. Chapter 9:18. If not for the fact that the Saint Seiya swore to the heavens that Gilgamesh had nothing to do with the Saint Seiya, everyone who saw Gilgamesh would think that he was one of the Saint Seiya, because whether it was in shape, appearance, or the way he wore it, it was exactly the same as the Saint Seiya's golden saint suit. The most similar part was the dazzling golden color that could blind a person's eyes. It was as if they were carved from the same mold. This also meant that Gilgamesh had revealed his strongest combat form. In fact, in Gilgamesh's hands, rather than a sword, it would be more appropriate to call it a staff. In Gilgamesh's hands, the obedient sword could not truly shine with the brilliance of a sword. In fact, the obedient sword was not just a simple sword, one could see this from its mountain-like body. The true form of the obedient sword was the form of the obedient holy suit that Gilgamesh was currently wearing, and Gilgamesh's true weapon was also revealed at this moment. Gilgamesh, who was wearing the obedient holy suit, suddenly made a posture of drawing a bow. At the same time, a golden bow and arrow automatically appeared in Gilgamesh's hands. The obedient sword, which had already transformed into the obedient holy suit, suddenly appeared on the bowstring of this golden bow and arrow. Obviously, at this moment, the obedient sword had become the obedient arrow, and Gilgamesh had also changed from a swordsman to an archer. It's the obedient arrow. Seeing this scene, Gohan also understood that his most critical moment had arrived. Just like Ho Yi's strongest killer move, the sunset arrow, which could only be used once a month, the obedient arrow was also Gilgamesh's strongest killer move. But the obedient arrow was different from the sunset arrow. The sunset arrow could only be used once a month, but the obedient arrow did not have this restriction. As long as Gilgamesh's own strength was enough to support the phantom image of the obedient arrow would appear endlessly until his opponent became a corpse. "Come, my baby!" The corners of Gilgamesh's mouth curled slightly, and he loosened his fingers on the bowstring, successfully releasing the unfilial arrow. It was said that the unfilial arrow could reach a speed of 1/10,000th of the speed of light. It was a speed that Gohan simply could not react to. Before Gohan could raise his Chidien sword, the unfilial arrow had already struck Gohan's forehead. A deafening roar that sounded like more than 10 tons of TNT exploded, coupled with the explosive effect of hundreds of boxes of fireworks exploding at the same time. Thick smoke instantly occupied the entire space. Even Gilgamesh could not see Gohan's situation clearly from dozens of meters away. He should be dead. No famed swordsman can survive the obedient arrow. Gilgamesh had wanted to say that no famed swordsman could survive the obedient arrow, but he was glad that he did not finish his sentence. Because when Gilgamesh's strong wind blew away all the smoke in the space, the human was still standing firmly in front of him, and his body was still unharmed. This human. Gilgamesh was faintly unable to control himself. The damage of the unfilial arrow was the most powerful move he could use among the conventional skills he could use. Such a move could even instantly kill a spirit sword tier swordsman, and even an immortal sword tier swordsman would flee in panic upon seeing it. What kind of ability did this little famed sword tier swordsman have to survive the unfilial arrow? On the other hand, although Gohan appeared to be very calm and the obedient arrow did not cause any damage to him, in truth, Gohan knew that he was suffering. That attack just now had directly consumed the upper limit of 3,000 quarks of Gohan's sword essence. This kind of attack was no longer the damage that an Eon-tier swordsman like Yuan Ko could inflict. This kind of damage was extremely close to the damage that a Flood-tier swordsman like Yuan Ko could inflict. Gilgamesh was indeed worthy of being called a half-Flood-tier swordsman like Yuan Ko. Interesting. Interesting. I'd like to see how many more of my arrows you can take. The snow-white flesh on Gilgamesh's face trembled unconsciously. At the same time, the shadow of the unfilial arrow began to charge again. It would only take a few seconds for the next unfilial arrow to appear. With Gohan's current reaction speed, this arrow was simply unavoidable. Right now, Gohan only had an upper limit of 30,000 quarks of sword essence left. In other words, Gohan could at most withstand the attack of 10 more unfilial arrows. No, perhaps he could only withstand 7 more arrows, because after 7 arrows, the upper limit of Gohan's sword essence would exceed the minimum limit of 10,000 quarks of a famed sword tier. If that happened, whether or not Gohan could still use the Chidien sword was a big question mark. 3 green lotus swords, green lotus, white lotus body. Gohan also understood that the battle had already reached its final juncture. He was afraid that he would have to bring out his trump card. He had to hold on until Liunian Ling arrived. Only then would the Zhou Tian star battle formation have a final chance of survival. Therefore, Gohan could only use the green lotus white lotus body once again. Although he clearly knew that using the 3 green lotus swords would cause extremely serious side effects, every time he used the green lotus white lotus body, the progress of the second sword of the 3 green lotus swords would be further improved. Gohan had no other choice at this time. Yin-Yang sword technique, Juzi sword. At the same time, Gohan directly used the Yin-Yang sword technique as well. At the same time, he grasped the Juzi sword in his hand. Go! After the Yin-Yang sword technique finished preparing, Gilgamesh's unfilial arrow also finished preparing at the same time. The illusory unfilial arrow shot out once again. Then, there was another explosion and another sky full of dust. But this time, Gilgamesh couldn't help but frown, because he discovered that his unfilial arrow didn't seem to hit its target. Could it be that this famed sword-level swordsman had the ability to dodge his unfilial arrow? Just as he was thinking about this, Gilgamesh's expression suddenly changed. Golden light flashed as he suddenly leapt backwards, but this leap seemed to be a bit too late, because the 2 famed swords had already struck the gap between Gilgamesh's unfilial holy robe, causing a bit of bright red blood to splatter in the air. I'm actually injured. Gilgamesh touched his waist and felt a bright red blood stain, but this blood stain wasn't much, obviously just a small wound. It was about the size of a cut on a finger when sharpening a pencil. In reality, this small wound probably didn't even cause 10 points of damage. Gilgamesh was almost equivalent to a super big boss with tens of millions of HP, so the actual meaning of 10 points of damage could be imagined. But from another point of view, this had great meaning. That was, it meant that Gilgamesh wasn't invincible to the extent where he couldn't be injured. Gohan still had the strength to defeat Gilgamesh. Human? What did you do? You can actually injure me? Gilgamesh asked Gohan, who was gradually emerging from the dust. Gohan didn't give any explanation. His hands simultaneously gripped the Juzi sword and the Qi-Dian sword, 2 sword maidens. Every inch of Gohan's flesh and every cell seemed to tremble slightly, like a volcano that could erupt at any time. This was Gohan's final trump card. The powerful basic attributes of the Juzi sword and the Qi-Dian sword merged into one under the effect of the Yin-Yang sword secret art. After the Yin-Yang sword secret art entered the dual sword realm, Gohan could simultaneously use 2 sword maidens of the same realm with the same basic attributes added together. Right now, Gohan had 2 close-fitting shields with doubled energy on the surface of his body. Whether it was attack power, defense power or reaction speed, they all increased by 4 times. In addition, the green lotus white root body increased his body control by 100 times. Purely in terms of reaction speed, Gohan was equivalent to an increase of 400 times. Green lotus white root body plus Yin-Yang sword secret art dual sword realm. This was currently the strongest fighting stance that Gohan could display. At the same time, it was also the first time that Gohan had displayed this kind of fighting stance. In previous battles, even when facing the extremely terrifying danger of Yuzhong City, Gohan had never displayed this kind of fighting stance, although in that battle, it was useless for Gohan, who was only at the level of a sword, to display this kind of stance. If you're not going to speak, then die. Gilgamesh released another obedience arrow, but this arrow had not left the bowstring. The moment Gilgamesh's fingers loosened slightly, Gohan, who was standing in the same place, leapt up from his original position like a lion that had smelled blood. Not only did this leap avoid the obedience arrow, he also took advantage of the moment Gilgamesh froze after shooting the arrow to successfully sneak up to Gilgamesh's side. Without holding back, he left another wound in the gap of his obedience holy cloth. This was the effect of the green lotus white root body and Yin-Yang sword secret art, increasing his reaction speed by 400 times. This allowed Gohan to successfully see the trajectory of Gilgamesh's obedience arrow, and thus perfectly avoid the attack. Moreover, he even had time to launch a counterattack. Damn it! Damn it! Damn it! Another 3 obedience arrows missed. Gohan seemed to have found a way to deal with Gilgamesh, but Gohan himself knew in his heart that this was not a long-term plan. I'm not playing anymore. Let's see how long you can last. Suddenly, Gilgamesh put down the golden bow and arrow he spoke of. At the same time, he opened a void gate, and his whole body once again entered the void. Seeing Gilgamesh's strategic retreat, Gohan understood that his weakness had been discovered by Gilgamesh, and that was that he could not maintain this strongest stance for a long time. Using Green Lotus White Root Body alone was fine, and using Yin-Yang Sword Secret Art alone was also fine. Gohan's body could barely hold on for a while. However, when these 2 abilities were used at the same time, the burden on Gohan's body became extremely terrifying, especially on the cells in Gohan's body. This strongest stance was extremely harmful to the human body's cells, and Gohan could at most not exceed 3 minutes. After 3 minutes, all the cells in his body would completely collapse. After Gilgamesh deliberately hid in the void for a while, Gohan discovered that almost all the cells in his body were showing signs of collapse. Gohan knew in his heart that he could no longer maintain his strongest stance. If he insisted on maintaining it, most of the cells in his body would probably collapse. Without any other choice, Gohan could only helplessly cancel Green Lotus White Root Body and Yin-Yang Sword Secret Art, and then his whole body went limp and fell to the ground. Chapter 9:19. You're not bad. Seeing Gohan fall to the ground, Gilgamesh finally stood out from the void. Looking at the weak enemy in front of him, Gilgamesh nodded approvingly. To be able to force me to retreat, this can already be the greatest and last pride of your life. I will give you a hero's death. Gilgamesh materialized the golden bow and obedient arrow again, and aimed at Gohan's head. Should I use this now? Gohan could not help but pinch the jade ring on his finger. Gohan only needed to pinch the jade ring lightly, and he would be able to return to the trial formation of Chongyang Mountain with the help of the power left behind by I Ching. This was Gohan's last resort. Although Gohan was confident he could save his life with the help of the Jasper Ring, Gilgamesh had completely lost his restraint. However, Gilgamesh had completely lost his restraint. Once he left the spatial rift, the entire heavenly cycle stellar array would probably be destroyed. Should I hold on a little longer? Gohan thought to himself as he touched the Jasper Ring. Gohan still had more than 20,000 quarks left. He could withstand around 7 obedient arrows, which meant he could buy himself another 40 seconds. However, Gohan would need to use all his remaining sword essence to buy himself another 40 seconds. From then on, Gohan would have to return to the state of an ancient sword wielder and start from scratch again. However, he could only buy himself another 40 seconds. If Liuyan Ling could make it there in the next 40 seconds, it would be worth it even if Gohan used up all his sword essence. If Liuyan Ling could not make it in time, Gohan would only be wasting his time. As a matter of fact, according to Gohan's calculations, Liuyan Ling would need at least 24 minutes to get there. 30 seconds versus 24 minutes was an obvious answer. Gohan's best choice was to activate the Jasper Ring and escape to Chongyang Mountain's trial formation while he still had more than 20,000 quarks left to save his life. However, when Gohan was about to escape, the severed head of the 1,000-do Isuzu bell appeared in front of Gohan again. If Gohan had not chosen to give up on the 1,000-do Isuzu bell because of absolute benefits, perhaps Gohan would still be suppressed by the seal. In that case, Gilgamesh would definitely be able to delay Liuyan Ling's arrival. Now Gohan seemed to be faced with the same choice. Considering absolute benefits, Gohan should escape immediately. However, if Gohan escaped, the entire Zhou Tian star battle formation would be doomed to shatter. If Gohan held on for another 40 seconds, would a miracle happen? Gohan was still hesitating, but Gilgamesh did not. The next arrow, the obedient arrow, accurately hit Gohan, who had completely lost his strength. Gohan's personal shield kept rippling, and another 3,000 quarks of sword essence disappeared. Gohan's sword essence limit was now only slightly more than 19,000 points. Oh! Have you completely given up resisting? I like this kind of good boy. Gilgamesh smiled slightly, but his hands did not stop moving. The invisible obedient arrow began to condense again. Only 5 seconds later, the second obedient arrow once again took a picture of Gohan's body. 16,000 quarks. 13,000 quarks. The sword essence limit in Gohan's body continued to drop, and soon, there were only more than 13,000 quarks of sword essence left. It had reached an extremely dangerous point. Soon, the sword essence limit in Gohan's body would fall below 10,000 quarks. Gohan might not even be able to use his famed sword-class sword mistress. I'd better go back. It's not shameful to escape now. Gohan squeezed the jasper ring in his hand. In just a second, he had made up his mind countless times to trigger the power in the jasper ring, but in the end, he was stopped by an invisible force. It was as if it was telling Gohan that perseverance was victory. 10,000 quarks. Gohan's body once again suffered the attack of the obedient arrow. With just one more arrow, Gohan would immediately fall to the sword essence level of a treasured sword-class sword wielder. That would undoubtedly be an earth-shattering result. Damn it, let's go. Where did my rationality go? Gohan bit his tongue hard and smiled. Blood with a slightly fishy smell immediately filled Gohan's mouth, and it also made Gohan's long-lost rationality return to his mind. This time, Gohan had made up his mind. He could not let the upper limit of his sword essence continue to fall like this. He had to retreat. He had already done his best for Shanghai Pass. However, just as Gohan was about to leave, the tightly shut door was suddenly kicked open by someone. Gilgamesh, who was about to use the obedient arrow, and Gohan, who was about to escape, stopped in their tracks. Then, they saw the awe-inspiring Ling Liunian Ling barge in with Ashima, who had a look of disdain on her face. "You're not dead yet." Seeing Gohan lying on the ground, Liunian Ling's tense face finally revealed a happy smile. Then, this smile was quickly hidden by Liunian Ling. She turned to look at Gilgamesh with a calm and murderous expression. "Gilgamesh, my Liunian clan has finally found you. Today is the day you die." Just like how she had appeared, Liunian Ling spoke in the same awe-inspiring manner as Ling. It was as if Gilgamesh was just a small monster that could be easily killed by Liunian Ling. "Who are you? Such arrogance at such a young age." Gilgamesh narrowed his eyes. He had no idea where the little girl in front of him got the confidence to speak to him like this. "Let me introduce myself. I am Liunian Ling of the Liunian clan. Today, I represent the Liunian clan and our ancestor, Lord Kanzu, to kill you, you dog," Liunian Ling said proudly. The feud between the Liunian clan and Gilgamesh had never stopped. Ever since she was very young, Liunian Ling had loved listening to the stories of her ancestor. Naturally, Liunian Ling was very familiar with the mysterious Yuan Ko, who had almost killed her ancestor's good friends. Other humans might not know who this Yuan Ko was, but as the direct descendant of the Liunian clan, how could Liunian Ling not know who this damned Yuan Ko was? Moreover, the Liunian clan had always had a rule that if their descendants had the chance to find Gilgamesh, they must do their best to kill this Yuan Ko and make up for the regret that Kanzu could not come down all those years ago. Therefore, when Liunian Ling heard the news of Gilgamesh's appearance, she used some extremely precious single-use items to teleport from the Sun Star garrison to the coordinates that Ashima had given her. Then, she followed Ashima into the Radiant Amusement Park without hesitation and used another single-use item to teleport outside the sealed ground. Of course, Liu Ling would only admit that she had used so many precious items to kill Gilgamesh. She would never admit that this had anything to do with Gohan. Yes, definitely not. You're the descendant of Fleeting Time Calendar. Gilgamesh was clearly shocked. It's been a few hundred years? Haven't the descendants of that fellow from Fleeting Time Calendar died out yet? Before we kill you to avenge our ancestors, the Liu clan will not die out. Liu Ling said proudly. You little brat, what gives you the confidence to say that you're so sure that you can take me down? Gilgamesh could not help but feel a little guilty when he saw Liu Ling's expression as she spoke. Although he was mighty in front of Gohan and Ling, in front of Liu Ling, it was as if he had eaten a black chicken and white phoenix pill, becoming timid. This was mainly because he had suffered too many losses at the hands of Kanzu back then. Now that he saw Kanzu's descendant, he felt that Kanzu would suddenly jump out and beat him up. Ling, don't waste time with him. Use the 3-meter goddess. There are 300,000 humans outside, it's enough for you to kill this Gilgamesh 10 times over. Gohan whispered to Liu Ling. Gohan naturally knew where Liu Ling's confidence came from. It was the human path sword goddess's 3-meter goddess that even Gohan was jealous of. As a human path sword goddess, as long as there were enough humans, the human path sword goddess would possess nearly endless power. Although this might consume a lot of the humans' lifespan, which was too much for the already bitter humans in the Radiant City, there was no other way. After all, they could not just watch as Gilgamesh killed him and Liu Ling. Human path sword goddess? What the hell is that? After all, Gilgamesh had been away from the mainstream world for too long. The human path sword goddess only appeared after he was sealed, so Gilgamesh did not know the terror of the human path sword goddess. Otherwise, if a flood-level Yuan Ko heard that the human path sword goddess was in Liu Ling's hands and that there were 300,000 human lifespan that could be squandered by the human path sword goddess, this flood-level Yuan Ko would definitely choose to retreat immediately. Only a fool would fight to the death with a human path sword goddess. Unfortunately, Gilgamesh did not know this, so he only showed a puzzled expression and did not show any fear towards the 3-meter goddess. No. This sinner's life is not worth 300,000 human lifespan. Unexpectedly, Liu Ling directly refused Gohan's suggestion to use the human path sword goddess, and instead took out a card from her dimensional pocket. That's right, this was an exquisitely crafted card similar to those in card games. However, the character on the card was not a two-dimensional portrait, but a real photo. It was a character that Gohan looked familiar to him. Fleeting Year Calendar. He did not expect Gilgamesh to be the first to recognize the character on this card, but this was not surprising. After all, the two had been entangled for a lifetime, so of course Gilgamesh could recognize his old enemy at a glance. Gilgamesh, let the unfinished battle from 900 years ago end today. The ancestor has been waiting for you for many years. Liu Ling smiled slightly, and the card in her hand instantly incinerated. Then, an illusory shadow floated out of the card, and finally gathered into a handsome figure in white robes. Lord Kanzu. Seeing this figure, Gohan could not help but lower his head. This was indeed Kanzu's fleeting year calendar. He did not expect Kanzu to bear such a grudge against Gilgamesh that he deliberately left his sword mark and soul seal to destroy Gilgamesh. Chapter 920. The sword scar soul imprint was a method that only Jiendi could use. It was to leave a spiritual imprint on something that Jiendi often used. Then, when faced with a certain situation, it could activate the sword scar soul imprint that Jiendi left behind. It could activate the image of Jiendi. It had 10% of Jiendi's strength. It was a life-saving artifact that every Jiendi left behind for their descendants. It could save the entire family at a critical moment. It was a pity that the sword scar soul imprint consumed Jiendi's own soul. Depending on Jiendi's strength, The number of souls that could be cut off to make the sword scar soul imprint varied. An ordinary Jiandi could leave behind 3 sword scar soul imprints at most. The powerful Jiandi could leave behind 5. As for the most powerful Kanzu, it was said that he could leave behind 12 sword scar soul imprints. After Kanzu's death, the Lunyen family had already used 7 sword scar soul imprints in the face of the various dangers of the human race. In other words, the Lunyen family should still have 5 sword scar soul imprints left behind. These 5 sword scar soul imprints left behind by Kanzu were all extremely important treasures. Each of them was priceless and could even save the fate of the human race at a critical moment. Previously, every time Kanzu used the sword scar soul imprint, it was to deal with the flood grade Yuan Ko. What a huge loss! Guhan looked at the Kanzu's sword scar soul and said regretfully, "The sword scar soul imprint is too precious. It can't be used in this kind of place. Using the 3-feet goddess would also be enough to kill this fellow." "It's fine." Liu Ling shook her head and said very seriously, "This is something that the old ancestor specially instructed us to do. If the descendants of the Lunyen family have the chance to see this fellow again, they must use this sword scar soul imprint. The old ancestor said that he must kill this fellow with his own hands." Just how deep is the enmity between Kanzu and Gilgamesh? It's actually this deep. Guhan was speechless. Since the fleeting year calendar had purposely left behind a sword mark to deal with Gilgamesh, there was nothing he could do about it. As long as Kanzu was happy, everything was fine. While Guhan and Liu Ling were chatting leisurely, Gilgamesh, on the other hand, was not so relaxed. When he saw Kanzu's sword soul, Gilgamesh rolled his eyes and secretly opened a void gate, trying to escape into the void. "Old G, aren't we going to catch up?" Kanzu's sword soul buzzed, and the open void door instantly closed, not giving Gilgamesh any chance to escape. "Little fleeting time, I didn't expect to see you here." As Gilgamesh spoke, he secretly swiped his finger to the side, still trying to open a new void gate. But something that made Gilgamesh despair happened. No matter how much Gilgamesh tried to touch the void did not give Gilgamesh any response. It was as if the void no longer existed. Gilgamesh knew that the fleeting year calendar's sword soul had sealed off the entire void. He could no longer escape through the void gate. "Enough with the nonsense, old G. Let's settle the score between us today." The fleeting year calendar's sword soul raised the sword in his hand. "You gave me a sword strike in Wuhan City that caused me to be unable to live in peace. Now, I'm returning this sword strike to you. If you can withstand this strike of mine, then the score between us will be settled, and my sword soul will immediately dissipate. But if you can't withstand this strike, then please come find me in the dimensional space." "A strike?" Gilgamesh's expression turned into one of anger. "Little fleeting time, I admit that I've lost. I'm no match for you. But you think you can defeat me, the hero King Gilgamesh, with a single strike? You think too highly of yourself. Even the so-called second you, shrouding heaven geezer, could not hurt me with a single strike, much less kill me." Gilgamesh spat out another shocking secret. Who would have thought that he had actually fought against the heaven-shrouding Sword Emperor back in the day, but he had called heaven-shrouding Sword Emperor an old man. Could it be that the heaven-shrouding Sword Emperor he had met was I Ching's father? "Then you can give it a try. As long as you can withstand a strike from me, my sword soul will immediately disappear, and I will have nothing to do with you." Although Guhan could not see Kanzu's expression from behind, Guhan believed that Kanzu's expression was one of disdain, as if Gilgamesh was a pile of dog shit by the side of the road. "You said it yourself. As long as I can withstand a strike from you, we'll be even." Gilgamesh couldn't wait to confirm with the sword master, as if he had picked up a pie falling from the sky. Since Gilgamesh, who had the pride of a king, could say such weak words, it could be seen how terrifying the sword master was in Gilgamesh's heart. "That's right. Have you forgotten that I always keep my word?" Kanzu said firmly. Good. Little fleeting time, you're getting more and more arrogant. Then I, Gilgamesh, will take a strike from you. Gilgamesh said. Very well. As soon as he finished speaking, the fleeting year calendar's sword soul raised the sword in his hand and slashed down like a woodcutter chopping firewood. It was such a simple slash, but it caused Gohan's eyes to almost pop out of their sockets. Gohan could see countless sword techniques fused into the slash, but when Gohan tried to distinguish them, all of them disappeared without a trace, leaving only the slash. If I were to face this sword, Gohan couldn't help but put himself on the opposite side of the sword master. Then, he imagined how he would face this sword if he were Gilgamesh. But when Gohan began to imagine this, he could not help but break out in a cold sweat. This was because Gohan discovered to his horror that he could not avoid the slash no matter what he did. He could not even block the slash, and could only stand there and take the blow. This is definitely not an ordinary slash. The sweating Gohan muttered to himself, this is the most primitive and quintessential slash in the world. This slash has already surpassed the limits of my imagination. Is this really a slash that a human can use? Is it really that exaggerated? Hearing Gohan's words, Liu Ling could not help but roll her eyes at Gohan. Isn't this our clan's harmonious stream of flowing goblets? This is a basic slash that every descendant of the Fleeting Time clan must learn. How can it be as powerful as you say? You're saying that this is a basic slash? Gohan was at a loss. Such a powerful slash was only a basic slash? Then just how powerful was Liu Ling's swordsmanship? Then why did he feel that Liu Ling's swordsmanship was not as good as his? In an instant, Gohan suddenly felt as if his skin had been pricked by a needle. Turning his head, he discovered that Kanzu's sword spirit was actually looking at him. Within those empty and illusory eyes, Gohan seemed to be able to see something profound. Fleeting Time Calendar, you've won. Suddenly, Gilgamesh, who had not spoken a single word since Fleeting Time Calendar used the harmonious stream of flowing goblets, revealed an expression of relief. Then, in that instant, Gilgamesh's corpse began to slowly disintegrate like a sand sculpture. The ashes of his body slowly piled up on the ground like an hourglass, forming a small mound of sand that looked like a grave from afar. Gilgamesh had died just like that. He had died so simply under Liu Ling's slash. Gilgamesh, who had once toyed with Gohan like a fool when he was in his strongest state, had died just like that. There was not a single trace of excitement as he quietly turned into a mound of sand. When Gilgamesh's entire body had turned into a mound of killing intent, a round golden ball slowly floated out of the mound of sand. Is this Gilgamesh's heroic soul? It seems like Gilgamesh is really dead. Seeing this golden ball, Liu Ling couldn't help but mutter to herself. The heroic soul corresponded to the godhead, and it was something that Yuan Ko, who was above the universe realm, would definitely have. It was the final core of Yuan Ko's power. Yuan Ko, who was a god, had a godhead in his body. It was just like the three Egyptian gods, Medusa, Loki, and the other gods who had died in front of Gohan. As for Yuan Ko, who wasn't a god or above the universe realm, the thing in his body was called a heroic soul. Its function was similar to a godhead, but it was different in nature. A godhead appeared by stealing the power of heaven and earth, but a heroic soul was condensed from one's own power. Therefore, Yuan Ko, who had a heroic soul, was usually stronger than a god of the same rank. In the face of Gilgamesh's heroic soul, Gohan had two choices. One was to shatter Gilgamesh's heroic soul, and then a dimensional vortex would appear and take Gilgamesh out of this world. Then, Gohan would be able to absorb enough sword essence from the dimensional vortex. The second was to keep this heroic soul. There were many uses for a heroic soul, and it was a very precious material. If Gohan gave this heroic soul to a Bay City, he would probably be able to exchange it for a full set of materials for a famed sword maiden. This was much more cost-effective than sword essence. Therefore, just as Gohan was about to pick up the heroic soul, a sword light flashed, and Gilgamesh's heroic soul was completely shattered. At the same time, a dimensional vortex appeared. Gohan, who was about to pick up the heroic soul, was speechless. Because the one who chopped the heroic soul was none other than the Sword Ancestor's Sword Soul. Originally, Gilgamesh was killed by the Sword Ancestor. Gohan did not have the face to accuse the Sword Ancestor of not knowing how to cherish treasures. Only then can our grudge be considered resolved. Can you forgive an old man like me for my selfishness? The fleeting year calendar said faintly. There was nothing wrong with what the fleeting year calendar said, but who was the fleeting year calendar saying this to? Was it to Liu Ling, or was it to Gohan? Chapter 921. After Gilgamesh's heroic soul was destroyed by Khonsu's sword, the specks of golden starlight within the heroic soul rose like smoke and disappeared into the sealed space. At the same time, the dimensional vortex grew to its largest size. Gilgamesh's level was too high, so the dimensional vortex grew to the size of a car. This was the largest dimensional vortex that Gohan had ever seen because of a certain Yuan Ko. The larger the dimensional vortex, the more sword essences it could absorb. Based on the size of this dimensional vortex, there were at least 100,000 quarks of sword essences in it. Go. Don't waste the sword essence. It's useless to me right now. Fleeting Calendar said to Fleeting Time Lin and Gohan, who were standing beside him. Fleeting Time placed his 3-foot sword into the dimensional vortex and began to absorb the sword essence in the dimensional vortex. Gohan hesitated. After all, Gilgamesh was killed with Khonsu's help. Gohan was simply saved by the Fleeting family. Gohan did not have the face to share the Fleeting family's spoils of war. Moreover, when Gohan saw Fleeting Calendar's sword soul, he felt guilty for no reason. After all, Gohan had mercilessly stabbed Khonsu. Khonsu naturally did not know about it, but Gohan remembered it in his heart. Go. Gilgamesh will have at least 500,000 quarks of sword essence after his death. Ling won't be able to use that much by herself. Don't waste it. Khonsu suddenly turned to speak to Gohan, as if he had seen through Gohan's thoughts. He gestured to Gohan that he could also absorb the sword essence in the dimensional vortex. Since Khonsu had spoken, Gohan was not an unreasonable person. He drew his sword of chi and stabbed it into the dimensional vortex with Liu Ling full. It's full. A few seconds after the chi sword was inserted into the 3-foot sword, Liu Ling pulled it out, indicating that the 3-foot sword had absorbed enough sword essence and couldn't absorb any more. Previously, it was said that the sword elements absorbed by the sword lady from the dimensional vortex had an upper limit. At most, the sword lady could only absorb 20 times the amount of sword essence needed to synchronize her body. In other words, synchronizing a famous sword maiden required at least 10,000 quarks of sword essences, so a famous sword maiden could only absorb 200,000 quarks of sword essences at most. Although the 1-foot sword was the best famed sword, it couldn't escape the restrictions of this rule. Therefore, after the 1-foot sword absorbed 200,000 quarks of sword essence from the dimensional vortex after Gilgamesh's death, it couldn't absorb another quark of sword essence. Liu Ling could only put away her 1-foot sword. As half a flood-grade Yuan Ko, the dimensional vortex after Gilgamesh's death should have at least 500,000 quarks of sword essence, just as Khonsu had said. Gohan's sword of chi and Liu Ling's 1-foot sword had an upper limit of 200,000 quarks of sword essence. There were still more than 100,000 quarks of sword essence left in the dimensional vortex. When the dimensional vortex closed, the sword essence would be wasted. At the thought of this, Gohan said to Ashima, who had been watching the show from the side, "Come in and absorb the sword essence too. Don't waste it." "Do I have a share too?" Ashima jumped happily to the other side of Gohan, and clamped Gohan on both sides with Liu Ling. Then, she pulled out her prophet's sword and stabbed it into the dimensional vortex to share the rich spoils of war. On the other side, the sword of Qi was frantically devouring the sword essence in the entire dimensional vortex. Soon, it quietly told Gohan through the sword mark that it had absorbed 200,000 quarks of sword essence. Upon hearing this, Gohan was about to put away the sword of Qi, but the sword of Qi immediately added, "Don't be in such a hurry to put me away. I feel that I can still absorb some more sword essence." Gohan blinked and then decisively stopped the action of putting away the sword of Qi. He even sent the sword of Qi into the dimensional vortex so that the sword of Qi could have a wider contact with the dimensional vortex so that it could absorb more sword essence. At this time, the dimensional vortex had passed its maximum radius and began to gradually shrink. Soon it would close. "How much sword essence have you absorbed now, Qi-Dian?" Gohan quietly asked the sword of Qi through the sword mark. 40W. The sword of Qi's answer made Gohan a little excited. The sword of Qi had actually absorbed 400,000 quarks of sword essence, which was twice the result of a normal sword Maiden. Moreover, this result had not reached the upper limit of the sword of Qi. It seemed that the sword of Qi could absorb more sword essence. "I'm full too." A second later, Ashima put away the sword of Qi in satisfaction. This meant that Ashima had also absorbed 200,000 quarks of sword essence. In this way, Gohan and the other two had absorbed 800,000 quarks of sword essence from the dimensional vortex caused by Gilgamesh's death. This was not the final number. The sword of Qi was still continuously absorbing the sword essence in the dimensional vortex. "Strange? You haven't absorbed enough yet?" Ashima excitedly retracted her prophet's sword, and was surprised to discover that Gohan was still absorbing the sword elements in the dimensional vortex. Gohan had clearly started absorbing the sword elements in the dimensional vortex a second earlier than him. Logically speaking, he should have finished absorbing faster than him. Why hadn't he reached the upper limit of 200,000? It's like this. Just now, my sword Maiden was seriously injured in the battle with Gilgamesh. She hasn't fully recovered yet, so it's only natural that she'll take a longer time to absorb the sword essence. Gohan's explanation was flawless, and the sword Maiden did indeed have a setting where her absorption of sword essence would slow down after being injured. Before Liuyan Ling and Ashima arrived, Gohan had been fighting Gilgamesh alone, so it was only natural that his sword mistress would be injured. However, after taking a look at the sword mistress in Gohan's hand, Ashima couldn't help but feel a little puzzled. Although the sword mistress in Gohan's hand was identical to the one Ashima had seen before, she clearly remembered that it was a black sword mistress. Why was it golden now? Could it be that Gohan's sword mistress will automatically change color after being injured? Ashima made a random guess and didn't take it to heart. She would never have guessed that Gohan would have two sword mistresses. The dimensional vortex was still shrinking, but the starting point sword's absorption of sword elements had yet to reach its upper limit. 500,000, 600,000, 700,000. When the dimensional vortex finally closed, Gohan unwillingly pulled out the starting point sword. The starting point sword had absorbed a total of 850,000 quarks of sword essences. This was still not the upper limit of the sword essences that the starting point sword could absorb. Similarly, the starting point sword still hadn't completely absorbed the sword elements in the dimensional vortex. One Gilgamesh could actually bring more than 1,600,000 quarks of sword elements. This was already close to the sword elements that a dead flood-level Yuan Ko could bring. One had to know that a flood-level Yuan Ko could usually bring about 2,800,000 to 5 million quarks of sword element. However, this was equivalent to the sword elements that an Emperor sword-level sword wielder could bring. At the same time, this also meant that when all the sword elements in the starting point sword were transferred to Gohan, according to the ratio of about 50%, Gohan could get 430,000 quarks of sword elements. This not only made up for the 30,000 quarks of sword elements that Gohan had lost, but Gohan also earned 400,000 quarks of sword elements. At this time, as long as Gohan left Shanghai Pass, he could directly attack a spirit sword level sword wielder. Your sword lady's injury must be very serious. Seeing that Gohan only pulled out his sword lady the moment the dimensional vortex disappeared with a regretful expression on his face, Ashima instinctively thought that the starting point sword was too seriously injured, so it hadn't absorbed the upper limit of 200,000 quarks of sword elements. It's okay. I'm already satisfied to be able to save my life. It's enough that the sword elements can make up for what I lost. Gohan had an expression of rejoicing and helplessness, as if he really hadn't absorbed 20 quarks of sword elements. Still pretending to be innocent after getting a bargain. Kenzu's sword spirit, who had been watching silently from the side, suddenly said, scaring Gohan so much that he shivered. What did Kenzu mean by this? Could it be that he had already seen through the extraordinariness of the starting point sword and knew that Gohan had absorbed a total of 850,000 quarks of sword elements? Thinking about it carefully, this didn't seem to be strange at all. After all, the person next to Gohan was Kenzu. As the sword spirit of the most powerful sword wielder in human history, it wasn't surprising that he could see through the extraordinariness of the starting point sword at a glance. Fortunately, Kenzu didn't go too far and didn't delve into the issue of the starting point sword with Gohan. Instead, he carefully looked at the three juniors in front of him with a smile on his face. Then, he let out a long sigh, walked in front of Ashima, and touched her head. Although I don't know why a human like you would appear in this world, and I didn't know that there would be such a strange sword lady in the future, I can see that your future is destined to be full of difficulties and pain. But I hope you can remember one thing, and that is that you are ultimately a human. You must put the interests of humans first, and don't put the cart before the horse and do something that will be too late for regrets. Kenzu said as he touched Ashima's head like a charlatan. Liu Ling was a little baffled by her ancestor's words, but Gohan understood it all. It was obvious that the great Kenzu had seen through the truth of Ashima's identity. He knew that Ashima wasn't a real human, but a hybrid between a human and Yuan Ko. That was why he said things like, I don't know why a human like you would appear in this world. At the same time, he also reminded Ashima to remember her identity as a human and not to betray it. Although Kenzu told Ashima not to do so, after listening to Kenzu's words, Gohan had a feeling that Ashima would betray humans sooner or later. Chapter 922. Father, the Black Tortoise was wrong. The Black Tortoise shouldn't have blamed you wrongly. The person who rushed in was the Black Tortoise, and he apologized to Gohan the moment he opened his mouth. This surprised Gohan. How did the Black Tortoise, who had said all sorts of harsh words to Gohan, apologize to Gohan so quickly? What happened outside the battlefield? I will remember Senior Kenzu's words. I will fight for the future of humanity in this life. Gohan immediately said passionately. However, he changed the topic and asked curiously, Senior Kenzu, didn't I hear that the fragments of consciousness exist independently? Even the original body cannot know what the fragment experienced before retrieving it. Senior, you've just been released from the Sword Scar Soul Seal. How do you know what the other fragment experienced? Hearing Kenzu's words, Gohan suddenly raised his head and looked at Kenzu in disbelief. What did he just say? What did he mean by snatching the sword Maiden from his corpse? Could it be? The Lu Nian family did not have it hard. They are the number one family in the human world and have enjoyed the privilege of 1,000 years. They have a super foundation that even an entire base city cannot have. If the descendants of the Lu Nian family have it hard, then everyone else in the world has it hard. Gohan thought to himself. However, he naturally could not say the truth in front of Kenzu. Well, Gohan had pretty much guessed his new identity in just a few words. Her? Who is she referring to? Gohan was at a loss over Kenzu's words. Suddenly, in the space where time had stopped, a figure swaying left and right hurriedly rushed into Gohan's arms. Could it be that the fragments of human consciousness could also exist in the game? Didn't that mean that the person who completed the quest with Gohan in the dungeon was not a simple NPC, but a fragment of Kenzu's consciousness? You don't need to know that. Just think of it as my special ability. Kenzu avoided this topic. It seemed like he did not want to tell the truth. He then changed the topic. I thought that the humans who lost their balance were going to die. I didn't think that there would always be a way out. The ruler allowed you to descend into this world. Our world finally has a chance of survival. That's impossible. You're just a blade spirit, and it happened in a dungeon. How could you possibly know that? Gohan's expression was like he had seen a ghost. At the same time, he looked around. Fleeting Time Ling and Ashima stood there without moving an inch. Their faces were expressionless, as if they were statues. Ancestor, grandchild, Liunian Ling, is the 27th generation descendant of grandchild. I didn't think that I would have the chance to see grandchild with my own eyes. Grandchild, ancestry, grandchild. Grandchild. In Liunian Ling's heart, her grandchild was an absolute legend. He was an existence that she looked up to. How could this be? Kenzu let go of his hand on the black tortoise's shoulder and took a few steps back. Unfortunately, this admiration was soon shattered. This was because Kenzu asked a question that made Liunian Ling want to vomit blood. Are you really my bloodline descendant? It's been passed down for 27 generations. It's inevitable that one of my unfilial descendants was made a cuckold. Don't doubt it. I do know a little bit of the truth. Kenzu showed his thumb and index finger, which were about the size of a bottle cap. But I only know a little bit of the truth. As for what happened to your sword after it left my body, I don't know. Liunian Ling was speaking the truth. Since ancient times, the billion sword technique could only be used by those with the bloodline of the Liunian family. Even if others were given the billion sword technique manual, they would not be able to learn it even if they practiced it for decades. Don't worry. I know that you don't want others to know these secrets, so you used a little trick to stop time in this space. Kenzu said calmly, as if stopping time was really just a trick. It wasn't at first, but it was later. Kenzu said indifferently. It was just a simple NPC. Later, when the NPC was about to die, the consciousness fragment realized that something was wrong. So, it possessed the corpse and witnessed the end of the dungeon. No, not at all. Kenzu shook his head. Although it's really bad of a person to do this, I've checked your information. It's not easy for you to reach this stage. Humans also need a talent like you. Even if I don't like you, I can't destroy a talent like you. If you really feel guilty towards me, then use all your guilt to fight for humans. What do you think? Time. Space. I understand. I understand. On the other side, the confused sword master seemed to understand something. He raised his head and looked around the entire sealed space. His face suddenly showed an ecstatic expression. Ancestor, what kind of joke are you talking about? Liunian Ling's face was red. It was unknown whether it was from embarrassment or anger. If there's a problem with my bloodline, how can I use the billion sword technique of the Liunian family? Finally you. Kenzu finally looked at Gohan. Daddy? What daddy? Black Tortoise, why do you call him daddy? Kenzu shook Black Tortoise's body with a dumbfounded expression. He called out Black Tortoise's name intimately, as if he had known Black Tortoise for a long time. As for how I know about this, there's no harm in telling you. Don't think that just because a sword maiden can leave a fragment of her consciousness in a dungeon, humans can't leave a fragment of their consciousness in a dungeon. Kenzu's words were like a bolt from the blue that struck Gohan's mind, messing up Gohan's worldview and common sense. Alright, I was just joking. Kenzu rubbed the head of his 27th generation granddaughter, and then said with a sigh, "It's been hard on all of you. For 1,000 years you've been fighting for humans. You've carried out my will. This is good. This is what my descendants should do. After 1,000 years, it's finally time for us to meet." Kenzu stared at Gohan, and then turned his gaze to the sword of Chi in Gohan's hand. He smiled slightly. "I didn't expect this sword Maiden, who was snatched from my corpse, to grow to this stage. We humans are lucky." At the same time, the other properties in the space were completely still. Even the dust was fixed in place and did not move. In the entire space, there was nothing that could move except for Gohan and Kenzu's sword souls. "Oh, and then there's you. By the way, which generation are you, my descendant?" Kenzu's sword soul turned his gaze to his true descendant, Liunian Ling. He looked at Liunian Ling with interest and then asked, "Gu Black Tortoise? Why did you suddenly appear here? How did you appear?" Because time had stopped, Liunian Ling couldn't understand when Gu Xuanwu appeared. "What? Why do I have to call him Daddy? He's my daddy, what's wrong with me calling him Daddy?" Gu Xuanwu said in confusion. Just as Gohan was puzzled by this, his back was suddenly grabbed by a hand, and another hand grabbed Gu Xuanwu's shoulder. Then, the hand forcibly separated Gohan and Gu Xuanwu, and threw Gohan away like a piece of trash. This game is really a paradise for consciousness fragment. A consciousness fragment that was supposed to disappear after appearing for a short period of time in the real world can actually live forever in the game. That's why my consciousness fragment lived like an NPC in the game for 200 years. Back then, I personally witnessed Gu Jin's transformation from a naive boy to a scoundrel sword emperor. I even transformed into a player and fought alongside him for more than 20 years. I feel like I've regained some of my youth. So, what exactly did this sword ancestor understand? Not only did Liunian Ling want to vomit blood at Kenzu's words, even Gohan couldn't help but laugh. Speaking of which, Kenzu's worries weren't wrong. After all, 27 generations of 1,000 years had passed, and it was inevitable that a few unlucky children would be cuckolded, and then become fathers. This was a very possible thing. Perhaps Fleeting Time Calendar's bloodline would be messed up because of this. Leveler? Wasn't that what the mysterious Fleeting Maple had said before? That's right, according to Fleeting Maple, Fleeting Time Calendar was the leveler of this world. Did that mean that the leveler that Kenzu was referring to was him disappearing into another dimension? Then could it be further inferred that he would become the successor of the sword ancestor and become the new leveler of this world? Senior Kenzu, I have another question, and that is... Gohan was about to ask about the Gu clan's bloodline, but Fleeting Time Calendar's expression suddenly changed, and he blurted out, "Why is she here? Why is this happening? This doesn't make sense," Kenzu said in a daze. All of a sudden, the entire space began to tremble, and Ashima and Liunian Ling, who had been motionless, regained their ability to move. "I've sinned." Gohan took a deep breath and said with a look of remorse, "I'm willing to accept Senior Kenzu's punishment. Actually, the so-called Sword Scar Soul Seal is just a method of cutting off a fragment of one's consciousness and sealing it into something." Kenzu explained slowly, "Other than the 12 Sword Scar Soul Seals that I left behind on the surface, I also left a fragment of my consciousness on a few other small items. 200 years ago, when this game was being built, it lacked an important component. Thus, my adorable descendants contributed a fragment of my consciousness to the game, and it became the core component of the game. That fragment of my consciousness naturally entered the game." "What are you doing? You actually dared to throw my father out. You must be that Gilgamesh. I will kill you." Seeing Gu Han being thrown out, Gu Xuanwu immediately became angry and wanted to make a move on the culprit. Chapter 923. Gohan was about to ask Kenzu for an explanation, but at this time, Kenzu, who was smiling at Gohan and the others, began to gradually dissipate, and finally turned into nothingness, completely dissipating. This was the fate of the Sword Mark Soul Seal. When the reason for summoning the Sword Mark Soul Seal disappeared, the Sword Mark itself could not exist for too long, and would eventually return to the world. Unfortunately, Gohan still had a lot of questions to ask Kenzu, but it was impossible to get an answer. It was just that when he recalled Kenzu's expression when he disappeared, Gohan faintly felt that it was a little strange. Because after a sudden burst of madness, Kenzu suddenly had a look of enlightenment, as if he had solved a lot of doubts and felt satisfied, as if he had obtained a great wish and left. Could it be that what happened just now had solved a problem that deeply troubled Kenzu? If that was the case, then what would happen? Just now, only Gu Xuanwu rushed in, that was all. Is this your daughter? As the saying goes, before one wave subsides, another wave rises. When Kenzu left Gohan and the others, Liuyan Ling once again greeted him with a dumbfounded face. She pulled Gu Xuanwu's arm, and could not wait to confirm with Gohan, "This is your daughter?" "No." Gohan decisively denied. What a joke! How could he let Liuyan Ling know about this kind of thing? Otherwise, when Gohan went out, he was afraid that he would become the best news material in the world. Moreover, Gohan could imagine, once he admitted that Gu Xuanwu was his daughter, how crazy would Liuyan Ling be? In any case, he absolutely could not admit that Gu Xuanwu was his daughter now. Dad. Compared to Gohan, who would not admit it even if he was beaten to death, Gu Xuanwu did not care at all. She pulled Gohan's sleeve, with a coquettish expression, as if blaming Gohan for not being willing to admit it. "I'm sorry, my cousin just received the news that her father passed away a few hours ago. So her spirit was stimulated, and I don't know why she started to call me Daddy," Gohan forcibly explained, but Liuyan Ling listened to Gohan's explanation. The reason was simple. Gohan had just passed the age of 18. For the Gu Xuanwu to be able to become a sword wielder, it must be above the age of 18. How could an 18-year-old father have an 18-year-old daughter? Therefore, Liuyan Ling chose to believe Gohan's explanation. Otherwise, Liuyan Ling's worldview would explode. "Surnamed Gu, what are you doing? Why won't you admit that I'm your daughter? Don't tell me you don't want me anymore?" Gu Xuanwu, who had just lost his mother, seemed to have become extremely sensitive. When she heard that Gohan wasn't willing to admit that she was his daughter, she immediately exploded. She pointed at Gohan's nose and scolded him. "I want you! I want you! Of course you're my daughter!" Helpless, Gohan could only use voice transmission to explain to the Gu Xuanwu, "Good daughter, please understand Daddy this once. There are some things that really can't be announced. At least before Daddy becomes an immortal sword wielder, these things definitely can't be announced. Please forgive Daddy this once." Humph! Gu Xuanwu seemed to be preparing to say something, when suddenly the entire sealed space started to tremble violently. At the same time, Gohan realized that everything around him seemed to have started to distort. It was as if Liuyan Ling's body was instantly pulled into the shape of a thin noodle. It was as if he was looking into a mirror, except that the world in the mirror had suddenly appeared in the real world. Rumble! Suddenly, there was a loud noise in the sealed space, and the entrance to the void gate instantly cracked open beside Gohan's hand. Strange? Why would a void door appear here out of nowhere? Gohan was instinctively attracted by this entrance. He reached his hand into the void door, and prepared to find out what was going on. But he didn't expect that when Gohan's hand reached into the void door, he felt a piece of cloth that was as slippery as silk, and there seemed to be something wet under the cloth. When his fingers touched it, he felt a moist and sticky liquid, and there was even some messy hair covered under the cloth. Not good. "This is my underwear," Gohan immediately reacted. He turned his head to look at Liuyan Ling's position. he discovered that the exit of the void door just happened to appear between Liu Ling's legs, and his hand that had reached into the void door directly reached out from the exit, covering Liu Ling's absolute domain. Wasn't this just touching her underwear thoroughly? Pervert! Although Liu Ling's reaction was a little slower than Gohan's, she still reacted. She raised her hand and was about to slap Gohan's face. How could Gohan, who had taken advantage of her, dodge? So he stood in place and prepared to silently receive this slap. But unexpectedly, this slap did not hit Gohan's face. You're still touching? Hurry up and take your dirty hand away, or else I'll give you another slap. Liu Ling snorted, then said to Gohan with a face full of shame and indignation. Gohan immediately retracted his hand from the void door, as if he had been electrocuted. Wait, what did you just say? A strange feeling emerged in Gohan's heart. I told you to take your dirty hand away? Why, are you addicted to touching? Liu Ling said bitterly, at the same time tightly covering her skirt. No. Didn't you just say, or else you'll give me another slap? Gohan repeated what Liu Ling had just said. Yes. Shouldn't I slap you? Liu Ling clenched her fist as if she was going to slap this shameless guy again. In other words, you just slapped me? Gohan said as he touched his cheek. It was clean, white, and tender. There were no traces of being slapped, and there was no burning sensation. That's right, Gohan definitely didn't suffer a slap from Liu Ling. Are you sure you slapped me? Gohan stared at Liu Ling inexplicably and asked. It was also at this time. Pa! A loud slap sounded. Gohan's face instantly felt a burning pain, and at the same time, it began to swell slightly. It could be seen that the strength of this slap was definitely not light. If it was slapped on an ordinary person's face, it was estimated that the other person's face would directly become a steamed bun. No. Although his face was slapped, Gohan's attention was not on his face at all. Instead, he was constantly looking at Liu Ling's hand. When he was slapped just now, it just so happened that Gohan's whole body was staring at Liu Ling. Every movement of Liu Ling couldn't escape Gohan's eyes. Gohan could swear to God that Liu Ling's arm absolutely did not move even a bit. This slap naturally couldn't be from Liu Ling. My question, how many times did you slap me? Gohan suddenly asked in a very annoying manner. One slap. Why, do you want a few more slaps? Liu Ling was also inexplicable. She had an expression of completely not understanding what Gohan was saying. That's right, I really only suffered one slap. Gohan touched his cheek and said to himself, but the time is not right. The slap on my face was 5 seconds ago. But the slap that Ling gave me was 15 seconds ago. Why is it like this? Could it be that the time has been messed up? Did Ling just exchange her existence in the timeline? Thinking of this, Gohan's face suddenly changed. He immediately reached out to grab the Gu Xuanwu and Liu Ling and said anxiously, hurry up and leave this place. The space and timeline here are all messed up. I'm afraid something bad will happen. Gohan pulled the two of them and did not run any distance. The Gu Xuanwu in Gohan's hand suddenly disappeared and appeared at the position where she was previously standing. After another second, the Gu Xuanwu suddenly appeared in front of the direction Gohan was running in. Throughout the whole process, Gohan could clearly see that his hand was still holding the Gu Xuanwu's hand. His own wrist was bare as if he was born with a disability. It's time. The time is really messed up. At this time, Liu Ling finally reacted. She realized that there was a huge problem with the time and space of this place. Gohan Ashima, let's get out of here quickly. Liu Ling knew the seriousness of the matter. She pulled the dazed Ashima along and the four of them escaped from the door that Liu Ling had kicked open. The moment they escaped from the door, Gohan felt the pressure on his heart disappear. At the same time, the mirror-like effect caused by the distortion of the surrounding space also disappeared. This made Gohan heave a sigh of relief. This meant that he was out of the range of the distortion of time and space. Why would such a terrifying distortion of time and space suddenly appear here? Guhan, who was out of danger, began to think. Prophet Sword, tell me, is this man-made power? Someone is interfering with the stability of the timeline. Ashima, who had been in a daze, suddenly came to her senses and said with certainty. Ashima did indeed have the ability to speak with certainty, because the ancient swords-grade sword maidens in her hands, the treasured sword maidens of the future 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 sword maidens. Don't forget that Ashima once summoned Gohan from a month in the future to fight with Gohan himself. She defeated the Heaven Reliance and almost caused Gohan to fail miserably. These three sword maidens were all extremely skilled in the Tao of Time. If they said that someone was interfering with the changes of the timeline, then someone was definitely interfering with the timeline. However, there was a new problem. To create such a strong distortion of time and space, it required a very powerful force. At the very least, it had to be a universe-level Yuan Ko. However, Gilgamesh was clearly defeated, and Kunzu's sword soul had dissipated. Logically speaking, there should be no power here that could cause the distortion of time and space. But why? Why was this place in disorder? You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.